Chapter 1283. In the Platinum Palace, Her Majesty the Queen was holding her beloved pet, but she did not seem to be very comfortable. Because at this time of the night, which was supposed to be a rest time, a large number of people had gathered outside the palace. There were at least 1,000 people standing outside the palace at this time, protesting, and the number of people gathered was still increasing. The anti-riot team had been mobilized. They built a human wall and prepared smoke bombs, water guns, pepper spray, and so on. But if there was no order, they could only stand with their anti-blast shields. The Prime Minister was urgently summoned an hour ago, and there was not only the Prime Minister present, but also those who held real power in the House of Representatives. Outsiders did not know what was being discussed at the center of power, especially the guards. They only needed to be responsible for the safety of the forces and not let anyone get close. There are really more and more people. Looks like they won't disperse until dawn, and there will be more people. Looking through the human wall, the team leader in charge of the anti-blast work shook his head and looked at his companion beside him. Get ready for a long-term confrontation. His companion shrugged and said, "It can't be helped," who asked for several places to be attacked in succession. The point is that the attacks were successful. Now they're probably having a headache about their own intelligence work, or maybe they will also discuss the budget of the intelligence system next year. The group leader didn't say much, but he knew very well that to be able to organize such a large mass protest in such a short period of time, the possibility of it being spontaneous was too low. Perhaps the poisonous snakes of the opposition had already begun to shout. He shook his head again. Ever since the referendum in the British Isles some time ago, the current government had been questioned. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps was heard, and the two men followed the sound. What he saw was a woman in a tuxedo. Her delicate and vigorous facial features seemed to be of Germanic descent, but her long blonde hair was simply tied up. Like a deacon, she walked past the two men with one hand holding a staff member and looked straight ahead. At this time, the companion whistled softly and asked curiously, "Who is this lady? Why can she walk freely here? Don't you know?" The team leader said casually, "She is one of the Queen's bodyguards. She has always been in charge of taking care of the Queen's daily life. I think her name is Lance?" Lance? His companion was startled and looked at the back of the lady. She was unusually tall, even taller than most men. Finally, she arrived in front of the room where the Queen, the Prime Minister, and the others were having a discussion. "Knock on the door." "Excuse me." She opened the door and walked in slowly. After she entered the room, she saw that the scene was immersed in a dignified atmosphere. Her Majesty was just holding her beloved cat and combing its fur, but she seemed to be in a daze. The Prime Minister was standing outside the window, silently smoking a cigarette. When she came in, everyone's eyes were focused on her. However, she acted as if she didn't see it. She walked directly to the Queen's side and put down the tray. There was a cup of water and a small plate. On the plate were a few pills. "Your Majesty, it's time to take your medicine." "Oh, okay." The Queen nodded subconsciously. Then, she looked at the current ministers and absent-mindedly swallowed the pills. After that, she packed up her things and turned to leave. The Queen's lips moved slightly, but she didn't say anything in the end. "Wait, Lancelot." But the Prime Minister spoke. Just as she was about to push open the door, he stopped her. "Honorable Mr. Birmingham, what can I do for you?" She turned around and asked politely, but she didn't smile. "What do you think about this attack?" The Prime Minister asked in a low voice. She said indifferently, "I'm sorry, Mr. Birmingham, I haven't received any orders yet. I'm asking for your opinion. I don't believe that Mr. Hopkins didn't contact you after such a big thing happened." The Prime Minister frowned. "This damn puppet." "Mr. Birmingham, my duty is only to protect the Queen's safety. Apart from this, Mr. Hopkins didn't ask me to do anything, nor did he say anything to me." She still said coldly, "If you want to know the attitude of the night mechanism from me, you don't have to. It's not as efficient as calling Mr. Hopkins yourself. He didn't answer my call at all." She sneered first. She just glanced at it and said indifferently, "If there's nothing else, then goodbye." "Wait, Lancelot." Under the gaze of the other leaders of the House of Representatives at the conference table, The queen finally braced herself and said, "Here is a letter secretly sent by the thugs who launched the attack this time. It states their request. I think you can listen to it." She showed a puzzled expression. The queen smiled bitterly and said, "They call themselves the Doomsday Myth and ask us to give them all of Northern Ireland unconditionally and recognize their independent rule of this area. If we don't agree to this request, then in the next month, they will continue to launch attacks like they did a few hours ago. The next attack will be in 3 days, and the location is unknown." She finally showed a trace of emotion this time. District 2 of the Fog City, where old houses and new high-rise buildings converged. At this time, in the gap between the houses under the shadow of the high-rise buildings, a figure jumped on both sides of the walls with a vigorous posture. It seemed that it would easily break through the gap in the alley. However, when the figure was about to step over one of the buildings, a big black net suddenly appeared above it. The big net instantly covered it. Then, a burst of crazy electric current began to be released in the big net. With a scream, it fell from the top and directly fell into the alley. Several men, wearing long black windbreakers and holding a long metal tube in their hands, quickly walked to the big net. They helped it up after being hit by the electric current of the big black net. He looked only in his early 20s, wearing a sweater covered with stains. His bangs were already wet with sweat, and at the same time, there were many wounds on his body. The young man who was helped up now lowered his head, his eyes blurred, and his mouth foamed. He was already unconscious. Chee! It was the sound of a match being struck. Head Knight Simpton lit a cigarette for himself, and then walked to the young man who was helped up. Simpton reached out his hand and pinched the young man's chin. After a while, he nodded. "Good, the third one. How many more are there?" One of the men in a long black windbreaker said, "According to the list in the hands of the orc traffickers, there are 2 more that haven't been found. Sir, this is the signal tracker we got from the orc traffickers. One of them is not far from us, and the other one is moving quickly. Looking at the direction it's heading, it seems like it wants to meet up with the one that's not moving." Simpton tilted his head and looked at the tracker in his subordinate's hand. He pointed at it and said, "Then let's stop here. Community center. Find these dirty bastards as soon as possible and drive them away. I really hate the smell of orcs. It makes me unable to sleep at night." "Yes, sir." This was definitely a genius. Will was extremely shocked. It was easy to tell whether a person knew how to play the guitar or not. Even if someone knew how to play the guitar, he couldn't pretend. From the beginning to the beginning, he started to play alone. That was his own fingering technique, his own habit. This handsome kid was obviously imitating his own fingering technique. Even though the child was only able to play the first part of the song slowly and smoothly, and was basically unable to continue towards the end, the child was still trying his best. This child's memory was so amazing, and at the same time, his hands were so nimble. Genius. It seemed like he had picked up a genius. Finally, the kid's hand stopped. He couldn't continue the rest of the song, but he soon started from the beginning, and this time he was even more skilled. Will was a guy who liked to share things with others. He quickly thought of his other 2 friends in the band and wanted to tell them about this. However, he couldn't get through the phone. In fact, no one answered. Will shook his head. Those 2 guys were probably flirting with girls in the bar. Will suddenly thought of a good rock friend who also taught him this song. Will once again listened to this song of original scenery played by this friend of his and instantly had the feeling of crying. That was the realm that Will was pursuing, and also the realm that he firmly believed that music could convey his feelings. Beep, beep, beep. Will? Calling me at this time. What's the matter? The phone was connected. It was not very fluent, and there was some English mixed with some accent. "Chung, do you know, I found a genius. You don't know how incredible this kid is. I believe you will like to know him very much." Will said excitedly, "Well, I will definitely want to know him. Are you going to introduce me to him?" That was a tone of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Of course. Are you free tomorrow?" "Oh, Chung, wait a minute. It seems that someone is coming. I will call you later and tell you the details." Will said, and then turned off the phone. At the same time, in the Royal Academy of Music of Fog City University. How strange. He smiled, then shook his head and put down the phone. At the same time, He turned on his laptop and started a video connection. The screen flashed, and soon, a family of 3 appeared in front of him. Among them, the child seemed to have been born not long ago. "Oh, let me see my adopted son. Hongguan, don't hide it. Look at this kid. He looks so much like me." "Like you, my ass. How can he look like you?" "Huh?" They began to laugh and chat. There were indeed people from the social work center. Maybe they came to ask for help. For example, some homeless people came back to ask for some food. Will looked back at the kid who was holding the guitar attentively. He smiled and gently closed the door, then walked out. He came to the reception area, but didn't see the homeless people he expected. Instead, he saw several people in black windbreakers. They didn't look like people who came to ask for help. "Excuse me, is there anything I can help you with?" Will came forward and asked. "Is there anyone else here besides you?" One of the men asked indifferently. "Who are you looking for?" Will frowned. He felt that these people didn't come with good intentions. A man standing behind suddenly said, "Ah, it's this smell. It's a nauseating smell. He's here, let's do it." After the man finished speaking, several men in black windbreakers nodded and directly past Will, breaking into the social work center. "Wait, you can't go in. This is private property." Before Will could finish his words, a man in a trench coat had already arrived in front of him and directly punched his abdomen. This caused Will to instantly bend over in pain, almost to the point of being unable to breathe. "You? What exactly do you want to do? We're saving you, kid. Don't you know how dangerous it is for you?" Simpson slowly came from behind, squatting in front of Will, and said with a sneer, "At the same time, we're looking for that guy. Don't worry, we won't destroy anything here. Take that guy away, and this matter will be over." As he spoke, Simpson shook his head. Immediately, one of his subordinates understood and walked over. He directly pulled Will up and forcefully dragged him into a nearby room. "Let me go. Let me go. What are you doing?" The door of the room was closed. Inside the room, Will suffered another heavy blow. This time, he directly fell to the ground in pain, retching, and didn't have the strength to get up. At the same time, outside, 2 men in black windbreakers directly dragged that handsome boy out. The boy was terrified, struggling, and shouting. He was finally brought in front of Simpson. "Oh, little bastard, welcome to Fog City, but you'll leave soon." Simpson smiled, sizing up this handsome boy. This handsome boy suddenly revolted. His eyes instantly turned red, and he suddenly broke free from the 2 men who were holding him, then directly rushed towards Simpson. However, Simpson didn't panic. The moment the boy rushed towards him, he suddenly kicked his long leg, and then like an axe, directly chopped the boy's body. Bang! The boy instantly hit the floor, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Simpson stepped on the boy's back, his eyes cold. A black shadow suddenly flashed in from outside, flashing by Simpson's side at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, the boy under his foot had disappeared. At this moment, his subordinates all took out their weapons. At the reception counter of the social work center, a young girl was standing in front of the boy, protecting him. Anger and resentment. The girl stared at the knights in front of her. Simpson slowly exhaled, stretching out his hand and lightly touching his cheek. The moment the girl flashed by, she left 3 thin blood stains on his cheek. "That's why I hate dirty, lowly, and rude bastards like you the most." Simpson narrowed his eyes, indifferently saying, "In the process of chasing, 2 orcs were provoked and went crazy, so we had no choice but to kill them. Write the report like this." "Yes. Yin 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 PS1. Point Mom has a golden keyboard event. Ends on the 31st and vote for me. PS2. Catch up later." Chapter 1284. On the outside, it looked like a luxurious manor, but in fact, it was the place where the Knights of the Round Table gathered. The manor was owned by a Sir Hopkins family. After centuries of continuous construction, it had become a sizable base. In the interrogation room, Reed slowly woke up from a state where he seemed to have taken a tour in hell. Along with his awakening came a pain that seemed to burn his soul. He couldn't help but groan a few times. Then, the first thing he saw was his hands. His hands were badly mutilated, as if they were fished out from fire, but at the same time his hands were still shackled, His whole body was chained to a metal chair. What a tenacious vitality to be able to wake up so quickly. In front of Reed was the pale face of a crying clown. One of the 12 knights of the Round Table, the clown Dargoni. Not only Dargoni, but Gareth was also present, as well as Mr. Hopkins, who was silently sitting on the side with his cane in hand. This senior cadre of Myth of Doomsday had suffered terrible injuries. The Knights of the Fog City had actually used a lot of precious medicine to pull him back from death. Originally, there was no need to go to the extent of rescuing him. But they had to do this because if they couldn't get the whereabouts of the other members of Myth of Doomsday from Reed, their contact information, and their next plan, after 3 days, this country would probably usher in a terrible disaster. At this time, under Reed's blank gaze, Mr. Clown conjured a remote control from his palm like a magic trick. Rant seemed to have realized something. Mr. Clown smiled as he extended a finger and slowly pressed it down in front of Rant's eyes. In an instant, a huge current flowed into the metal chair. A shrill scream sounded, and Reed's body, which was mostly burnt, was now twitching crazily. Gareth frowned and couldn't help but say, "Dargoni, we don't have much time. If you electrocute him, how much time do we have to waste?" "Don't worry, I'm counting." Mr. Clown let go of the button and shrugged. "I'm just doing a demonstration that can save us time. I believe that a smart person will know to answer honestly. Am I right, Mr. Reed?" Just as Mr. Clown had said, the electric shock this time did not make Reed pass out. It only made him suffer inhumane torture. But in the face of the clown's question, he weakly raised his head and revealed a disdainful smile. "If I don't tell you, will none of you be able to sleep?" The clown's lips curled up slightly. "Of course, I hope that you will remain silent." He pressed the button again, and the metal chair that was connected to the current emitted visible sparks. Reed's body convulsed even more crazily, and his eyes even turned white. "Reed, just how many people do you have in Doomsday Myth? Where are they hiding? Where's the next target?" Gareth asked quickly. "I hope you can end your current suffering. Please cooperate with us." At the same time, he reached out and snatched the remote control from Mr. Clown's hand. Mr. Clown curled his lips, squatted on the ground, and looked up. Gareth ignored him and just reached out to grab Reed's hair and raise his head. "As long as you're willing to cooperate, we can give you an extradition order and let you become a legal inhuman in your country. We will also come forward to negotiate with the Magician Association to revoke their wanted order on you." "Sunshine, you want that too, right?" Reed still sneered, and his voice was intermittent. "You agree to the request." "Sunshine belongs to us," Gareth frowned and said. "Do you know what you're doing? Ceding the whole of Northern Ireland and letting you be independent. Are you announcing your existence to the world? Are you trying to start a war? The shadow snake is about to reappear, and this is the beginning from death. Dargoni, you better know when to stop." Looking at Reed falling into a coma after the electric shock, Gareth's gentle face instantly became extremely stern. Mr. Clown was squatting at Gareth's feet, quietly reaching out his finger and pressing the electroshock button. He was so naughty that he had no friends. Gareth shook his head. After the third electric shock, Reed probably wouldn't wake up in a short time. He sighed, walked to Mr. Hopkins, and said with a frown, "Sir, this Reed has done a lot of drug resistance training. Our truth-telling liquid obviously won't work on him. If he insists on not revealing, I'm afraid." Mr. Hopkins rubbed the carving on his cane and remained silent. At this moment, the door of the interrogation room suddenly opened. A woman wearing a purple dress, black eyeshadow, and a great figure slowly walked in. Mr. Clown whistled, stood up, and flicked his fingers. In a flash, 3 flying knives appeared between his fingers. Gareth frowned. "Mind which? Gillian Anderson? Why are you here?" "I asked her to come." Mr. Hopkins sighed. "Gareth, I think we need to borrow her ability to get information about the Doomsday Myth from Reed's mouth in the shortest time possible." At the same time, the woman in the purple dress leisurely walked to Hopkins' side, sat on the armrest of the chair, and reached out to lift Hopkins' chin. "Dear Hopkins, I hope you will keep your promise. Don't try to control my mind, Gillian." Facing such a seductive beauty, Hopkins wasn't moved at all. His eyes were as clear as a lake. I will keep my promise, but on the other hand, you can help me. This is just a deal I have no choice but to make. Of course, you are the descendant of the great King Arthur. Ms. Gillian smiled, then glanced at Gareth and Mr. Clown, and then walked to Reed. Gareth still frowned, and looked at Mr. Hopkins inquiringly. I promised her that she would have the opportunity to visit that person. Hopkins shook his head. That person? Gareth instantly thought of something, and his face slightly changed. Sir. Hopkins waved his hand and said, including the time we need to deploy after we get the information about the Doomsday Myth. If you're confident that you can get the information from Reed's mouth within half an hour, I will not hesitate to terminate this deal. Gareth could only remain silent. Half an hour? With Reed's stubbornness, perhaps he wouldn't be able to say a useful word in half a month. Well, I'm curious. How did you catch Reed? A silver-level magician. Ms. Gillian circled around the metal chair, and her fingers began to stroke Reed's shoulder. This is a ruthless character wanted by the Magician Association for 10 years. Is it the work of Mr. Clown? It seems that your superhuman intuition is a good counter to Reed's transmigration technique. It's not me. Mr. Clown shrugged, not intending to explain in detail. Is that so? Ms. Gillian didn't seem to care, and after circling around, she came in front of Reed and cupped his face with both hands. Her eyes suddenly turned black, completely turned into a pair of completely black eyes. It was extremely strange. About 10 minutes later, Ms. Gillian stretched and smiled. Well, Reed's will has protection, which can prevent the spying of psychic magic. But I bypassed it. You have about 20 minutes, so ask whatever you want to know as soon as possible. With that, Ms. Gillian threw a coquettish glance at Mr. Clown and reiterated, There are only 20 minutes. It's not good to waste it on me. Mr. Clown had to take back the magic between his fingers. Before leaving, Ms. Gillian suddenly looked at Mr. Hopkins and chuckled. Prison. When I go, I'll inform you. In the room, Will got used to the pain. After catching his breath, he got up with difficulty and looked at the man in a black trench coat in front of him in horror. He seemed to have heard something else. It was the child's shouts coming from outside. Mafia, a criminal organization, or something else. We used the action of climbing up to quietly open the phone in his pocket. He didn't know who he was calling. He only hoped that someone would answer and, at the same time, be able to hear the conversation here. You're here to catch that child? Will frowned. His injuries were also caused by you? You actually abused a minor? If you don't want to cause trouble, don't be nosy. The man in the trench coat stood in front of the door with his arms crossed. Don't worry. We'll disappear from your sight and won't trouble you in the future. Will said with slight anger. But you took away an injured child from me. I seriously suspect that you're doing some illegal activities, even illegally imprisoning and abusing a minor. The man in the trench coat shook his head, seemingly impatient, but still said casually, You don't want to know the origin of the child you're talking about. What's your hand doing? With that, he took a step forward, pinched Will's arm, and forcibly pulled it out. Phone? Are you playing tricks? Let me go. You criminals. Let me go. The man in the trench coat threw Will's phone to the ground, then pulled him and threw him towards the wall. It seems that letting you sleep is a better choice. He sneered and walked towards Will. Will watched in horror. But at this moment, there was a loud noise outside the door. It seemed to be smashing. The man in the trench coat frowned, waved his hand again, and knocked Will to the ground. He was in so much pain that he couldn't even get up. I'll deal with you later. With that, the man in the trench coat opened the door and walked out. Outside, the man in the trench coat had already fallen to the ground, and the reception area of the community center was already in a mess. However, the orc siblings had already been forced into a corner. They had too many ways to deal with orcs, not to mention the minor. Simpton didn't make a move but just watched coldly. Sir? What's going on? The man who was watching Will hurriedly walked over, but Simpton just nodded. The man glanced and frowned. Sir, since the two targets had been found, what he received was Simpton's cold gaze. He could only swallow his words, then looked at the two little orcs in the corner. Sister. The boy hid behind the girl in fear. The girl protected him with one hand, while staring at the enemies in front of her, saying in a low voice, "Olga, I'll keep them busy. You run when you have the chance. You keep running. After you leave this place, run towards the tallest building. You must go to the 17th floor, the room with the swimming pool. There might be someone there who can protect you. But that guy's a long story. You have to be careful." "Sister, I won't go. Be good." The girl looked into the boy's eyes. "I promise I'll be fine. Then I'll go find you." As she spoke, the girl grabbed the boy's arm and threw him out. At the same time, she kicked her body and crashed into one of the men in a black windbreaker. Her growth hadn't reached the level of an orc. She was agile, but not strong enough. This collision didn't make a trained knight fall to the ground. But to her horror, her actions didn't work. When she came back to her senses, she saw that Olga didn't escape. Instead, Simpton easily grabbed his leg and lifted him up. Then he heavily fell to the ground. Simpton smiled and lifted his windbreaker. A narrow sword flew out and was about to pierce through Olga's body. "No!" The girl screamed in despair. At this moment, white fur started to grow all over her body, and her amber eyes turned dark red. Chee 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 chee. In the blink of an eye, a white gas suddenly spewed out. This white gas was emitted at an extremely fast speed, instantly filling the entire reception room. At the same time, an ear-piercing buzzing sound rang out from the reception room. Simpton covered his nose and waved his arm to get rid of the white gas. When some of the gas dissipated, a fire extinguisher was seen rolling on the ground. But the two little orcs were nowhere to be seen. "Where are they?" Outside the community center, Will carried the delicate boy and hurriedly got into a yellow car. Then, he rushed out of the community center. As a grand knight of the Knight organization, he actually let two orcs escape under his nose. Simpton's face instantly became gloomy. "You? How did you watch?" "I'm sorry, sir. Already beat him to the ground. I didn't expect." The man lowered his head and hurriedly apologized. "Humph. That's not enough. Quickly chase after him," Simpton said angrily. The man hurriedly nodded, looking at the yellow car running away. A trace of relief flashed across his face. Yin 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 PS 6/27. Chapter 1285. The yellow Ford Focus sped along the road. Will's eyes were still filled with panic. His lips were dry. From the rearview mirror, he could clearly see the two black Audi 3s. The group of people in black were still chasing after them. But after crossing the next street, they would be able to see the entrance of the police station. Once they reached there, they would be safe, right? You want to ask the kid about the background of those people. But even the girl who appeared later and seemed to be very close to the boy was unable to communicate with him. The girl and the boy were sitting in the backseat of the car. "He doesn't seem to understand what we were saying, right?" "Olga?" Lael frowned. "What's wrong with him?" "Yes, he doesn't understand." "Sister, don't worry." "The boy." Olga nodded and then told her what happened in the afternoon. "Sister, this big brother saved us. If he didn't create chaos." Lael hugged Olga and comforted him softly. "Sister knows that there are good people among humans, just like the town we lived in when we were young. The uncles and aunts in the town were all good people. But did you forget how scared they were when they found out about our identity?" "Sister," Lael stroked Olga's back, "they're all good people. Our identity will only bring them trouble. Look, including the person driving the car. Didn't he get into trouble because of us?" Olga was silent. Lael looked back and saw Simpton and his men following closely behind. She gradually became anxious. She looked ahead and realized that they were getting further and further away from the hotel. Only then did she realize that the man driving in front of her had his own plans from the start. "Don't go in this direction. Go there." "There." Lael reached over the back of the seat and pointed at the tall building in the distance from Will's side. "That is Song Dynasty Hotel?" Will was startled. "You want to go there?" "No, we should be going to the police station." "Police station?" "Police cop." "Okay." Lael shook her head and her expression became anxious. She kept saying something. Bang! While they were chatting, the yellow Ford Focus suddenly jolted. The Audi 3 behind it had caught up and crashed into the rear of the Ford Focus. "Don't hit my car. I still have 2 years of loans." Will stuck his head out of the car window and shouted angrily. Leo was still mumbling at the side. Will felt like his head was inflated like a balloon, but at that moment, he suddenly stepped on the brakes. The inertia caused Leo's body to crash into the front seat. But at the same time, the two Audi 3s behind them could not stop at all. Bang, bang. In front of the intersection, Ford Focus was pushed out of the pedestrian line. Leo turned around and got up. He glared furiously at Will and shouted, "What are you doing?" This time, even though there was a language barrier, Will was able to understand the reason behind the girl's roar. Red light. Leo shuddered and abruptly reached out to grab Will by the back of his collar. Then, he flung him to the back seat in a doggy-crawl position. Without a second thought, the girl grabbed the driver's seat and stepped on the accelerator. Just like that, she charged into the traffic ahead. Will opened his eyes wide. He had a feeling that the world was spinning. He could even foresee the situation where the traffic police would come knocking on his door. However, the two Audi 3s behind them did not seem to be catching up. Did they really get rid of them? He got up and looked at the back window. He saw that the two Audi 3s had turned around at the intersection and were driving in the opposite direction. They actually called for an emergency assembly at this time. In the Audi 3, Simpson frowned. Just as he was about to catch the two little orcs, the highest assembly order from the Knights of the Fog City was directly sent to his mobile phone. Simpson could only give up on the pursuit of the little orcs and turn back. In Simpson's career, he had only received this kind of highest assembly order twice, including this one. The last time was 10 years ago. It was for a crusade against that sinner. The yellow Ford Focus finally came to a stop. Will listened to the clicking sounds of his new car. His legs felt weak as he pushed open the door and got out of the car. It's over. This kind of serious violation of regulations, the insurance won't pay for it, Will sighed heavily. Leo took Oga's hand and walked to Will. Although you don't understand, I'm still very grateful for your care for my brother. We don't want to implicate you, so let's just leave it at that. After saying that, Leo bowed deeply to Will. Then, he clenched his teeth and tore off a necklace from his neck. He stuffed it into Will's hand and pulled Oga away. Will was startled. He looked at the necklace in his hand. It was made of string, and the pendant was polished very smooth. It looked like some kind of bone or stone mineral. Is this compensation? Will seemed to have understood Leo's meaning. He looked at the two little guys who seemed to be a loss. He opened his mouth. Finally, he chose to walk up quickly and blocked in front of the siblings. Question mark. Leo frowned. Will could only make a hand gesture. It's so late. Where are you going? You don't want to go to the police station, right? Which hotel are you going to? Do you know anyone there? I don't know if the people chasing you will show up. How about I send you there? Leo and Oga glanced at each other. Finally, Leo chose to ignore Will's hand gesture. He pulled Oga with one hand and directly ran away. Will hurriedly chased after them, but in the blink of an eye, he could not see the two children anymore. He could not help but be stunned in place. After a long while, he smiled bitterly and returned to his tattered car. His face was bitter like a gourd. Simpson strode along the corridor. The sound of his leather boots hitting the floor was very clear. He pushed open the door. The battle conference room of the Knight organization. Simpson looked around and found that all the Grand Knights of the Knight organization in the headquarters of Fog City, including the 12 guarding knights, were all here. Everyone's eyes fell on Simpson. He walked up and faced Mr. Hopkins. Sorry, I'm late. I'm on the way to hunt down orcs. Hopkins waved his hand and interrupted Simpson's statement. It's okay. Take a seat, Simpson. You've already found most of the orcs. We'll talk about the rest later. Simpson nodded. Then he walked to his seat and sat down. In front of his seat, there was a document. Everyone had this document in front of them. He hurriedly opened it and started reading. Hopkins cleared his throat. Simpson, read and listen at the same time. So far, we've already gotten the information of most of the members of Mythology of Doomsday from Rant, a senior officer of Mythology of Doomsday. We also know their next target. Everyone, if we can't organize the operation of Mythology of Doomsday, a terrible disaster will befall our country. Therefore, this operation will involve all the Knight organizations in the country. We must catch all of these thugs in one fell swoop before the next attack of the Doomsday Myth. Now, I'll distribute your work. The operation deployment meeting lasted for an hour. After waiting for orders, everyone in the night organization and the headquarters of Fog City left to prepare the equipment and supplies for this operation. Outside the war conference room, Gareth walked out with the meeting notes in his hand. He had a lot on his mind. At this time, a figure quickly walked up to him. "Klein?" Gareth was startled. "Didn't I approve your leave and let you go back to rest? I also received the assembly order." Klein hurriedly said, "Mr. Gareth, what happened? Could it be related to the attacks tonight? Is there anything I can do to help?" "Probationary night, Klein," Gareth said seriously. "Yes, sir." Klein immediately stood at attention and raised his head. Gareth said calmly, "The order I'm giving you now is, go back to your shoe shop immediately and continue your leave." "Sir, my injury doesn't affect my movement." Gareth only patted Klein's shoulder and didn't say anything else. He directly turned and left. Klein stood there in a daze, feeling quite down. "Kid, you're blocking my way." Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of Klein. He raised his head and saw Simpton with an indifferent expression. Klein hurriedly stood at attention again and moved aside, saying respectfully, "Mr. Simpton, I'm sorry." "Okay," Simpton casually replied and walked past Klein. He suddenly stopped and turned back. "Oh, right. I'll give you a suggestion, kid." Klein still stood at attention, raised his head and raised his chest, looking straight ahead. "I'm very willing to listen. If you can't ensure that you're in the best condition, you're just a burden on the battlefield." Klein opened his mouth, but Simpton had already walked away. Klein took a deep breath and bowed deeply to Simpton's back. "Thank you for your advice, Mr. Simpton. I'll remember it in my heart. Go away." Simpton casually waved his hand as a response. The yellow Ford Focus finally arrived at the entrance of the social work center. The hood of the car was smoking. Will got off the car and looked at the smoking hood, smiling bitterly. "Okay, I know you tried your best." "Will." At this time, a man quickly walked out of the social worker center and jogged in front of Will with a worried look on his face. "Chung?" Will was stunned and recognized the man. "You? Why are you here?" The man, Chung Iran, said angrily. "Didn't you call me and say a lot of strange things? Then you suddenly hung up. I was a bit worried, so I came to see you. What's going on here? Are you being robbed here? I called the police. They're still inside." "So he called you. I thought no one would pick up." Will sighed, saying, "Let's go in and meet the police first. My experience tonight is enough to make a movie." "Hey, buddy, have you ever tried a race on the streets of Fog City like in movies?" In the presidential suite on the 17th floor of the hotel, Boss Luo sat quietly with a whiteboard in front of him. As for the servant girl, she was wearing round-rimmed glasses and a black dress. Her stockings wrapped her legs well. Because the floor was covered with a carpet, she didn't wear high heels that should have been worn. The servant girl also held a marker pen and a pointer, tapping on the whiteboard. "Generally speaking, this is the process of the destruction of the Celtic gods." "Master, is there anything else you don't understand?" Boss Luo smiled slightly, pointing at his temple, chuckling. "I remember, teacher." At this time, the news report was broadcasted on the TV. The Prime Minister appeared on the screen and began to speak about several terrorist attacks in the British Empire a few hours ago. "We will severely punish these thugs." Luaccio lowered the volume of the TV, saying casually, "It seems that it's not over yet. After all, the number of casualties hurt the government and citizens." The servant girl said softly, "I guess by tomorrow, the whole world will be talking about it." "Well, the security of this hotel is really not good enough. It seems that all the efforts were spent on strained arrangements." She looked towards the direction of the balcony. Outside the glass door, two small figures were hanging in the wind. They were the orc girl and her brother Olga. The orc girl directly pushed open the glass door and walked in. Olga, who followed behind her, grabbed the corner of his sister's clothes, looking very uneasy. "Sir, you really like this way of entering the door." Miss Maid walked back to her master and waited quietly behind him. "It's not easy for me to come in normally, right?" The orc girl fearlessly met the servant girl's gaze. Why did she change into another set of clothes? It seemed that this magician really had some strange hobbies. "Miss Lale, congratulations on finding your brother." Luo Chio smiled slightly, looking at the boy behind the orc girl. Luo Chio couldn't help but take a second look at the boy's delicate face, like a young girl's. No matter if it was Lael or this boy, they were orcs. Shouldn't orcs be the kind in Blizzard's games? As he met more and more non-humans, Luochio gradually became interested in the form of these non-human creatures. What a beautiful boy! Lael suddenly blocked in front of Olga, her eyes full of vigilance. Luochio didn't mind, just said casually, "Miss Lael, since you found your brother, is there anything else?" Lael frowned. "Didn't you take your reward?" "I did find my brother because of your help, and I also helped him escape danger. Generally speaking, I'm very grateful for your help. But since I promised to give you a reward, I won't go back on my words. Come, what do I have to do?" "Well," Luochio smiled. "Actually, the moment you found your brother, miss, you didn't have to come again. I gave it to you when—" Lael was startled. She didn't feel anything, but she believed that there was no free lunch in this world. So she hesitated for a moment, then asked tentatively, "You really don't need me to accompany you for a month?" Such a straightforward character. Boss Luo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that the previous explanation was in vain. Baidu Search 81 Chinese Network. No advertising message. Chapter 1286. Beside the bed, Lael was carefully arranging the blanket for Olga. He had already fallen asleep. When there was a soft knock on the door, Miss Maid pushed the door open and walked in. At the same time, she put down some clothes. Lael took a look and opened her mouth. This woman changed another set of clothes. How many clothes does she have to change in one night? After Miss Maid put down the clothes, she nodded with a smile and turned around to leave. She didn't say anything. Lael hesitated for a moment and quickly chased after her. "Wait a minute." In front of the door, Lael gently closed the door and lowered her voice at the same time. "What's the matter, Miss Lael?" Yi asked indifferently. "That—" Lael stuttered for a moment and then said in a low voice, "That, thank you for letting us stay for the night. If you want to thank us, shouldn't you thank us in person?" Lael opened his mouth and looked up, only to see the servant girl's faint smile. In the room, in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, Luochio's legs were covered with a thin blanket. There was only a light for reading beside him. The book he was reading was prepared in the study room of the suite. It was a book about British folklore. When Yi brought Lael in, Boss Luo happened to see the story of Mordred's rebellion. "Miss Lael, what's the matter?" Luochio closed the book and stood up. He casually put down the blanket. "Miss Lael said that she wants to thank you in person, master." Yi came to Luochio's side and said softly. He looked at the orc girl and found that the beast ears on her head were slightly trembling. She seemed to be very nervous, so he said, "Do you like to drink tea, Miss Lael?" "Ah." Luochio smiled and said, "The tea made by Miss Maid is very delicious." Yi. As he said, Luochio casually snapped his fingers. On the small round table in the corner of the study room, a tea set quietly appeared. Lael was slightly surprised. What was more surprising was that she was familiar with this tea set. This was the tea set commonly used in the country where she was born. "Fruit tea or black tea?" Miss Maid looked at Lael and asked with a smile. "There are many fresh fruits in the kitchen. There are also some freshly picked cherries." Black tea is fine." Lael quickly waved her hand. "You don't need to trouble yourself. Actually, please sit down, Miss Lael." Luo Chio came to the table, pulled out a chair, and then made an inviting gesture. Lael steps a little bit. She had never been treated like this before. In other words, the people who took care of her and Olga on the farm were all casual and carefree people. They would sing and dance in front of the bonfire. They would also drink heartily during the harvest season. The smell of hops would always spread in the night wind along with the fragrance of tulips. "Are you thinking of your family?" Lael couldn't remember how she sat down and how she suddenly fell into her memories. But such a question brought her back to reality from her beautiful memories. "I don't have a family," Lael said subconsciously, but then she bit her lips lightly. "I have no family except Olga." As she said, she didn't forget to look at the beautiful woman who claimed to be a maid's way of making tea. It was really the way of her country. "How many spoons of white sugar?" "4." Miss Maid clearly received such a request. She gently lifted the lace on her sleeve with her left hand and started to make sugar with her right hand. She suddenly felt that she was like an ugly duckling in a story in front of these two people. Have you thought about how to leave? Luacio's question temporarily interrupted Lael's wild thoughts. She quickly said, "Tomorrow morning, I will take Olga and leave here. I will definitely not give you any more trouble. I have said that I have already received the reward for finding your brother." Luacio had always been very patient. He patiently said, "Do you still remember the contract you signed? It is already returned to me, and your lifespan has also been reduced by 1 month. Of course, you are still young, so you don't feel anything. I heard that orcs have a longer lifespan than ordinary people, so you probably don't feel anything." Lael subconsciously said, "I am a mixed blood. My lifespan is about the same as ordinary people." As soon as she finished speaking, she regretted it. Would the other party be curious and ask about her background? How was she supposed to answer him? "If you want to leave, it seems to be a little troublesome for Miss Lael." Luacio didn't ask further. Instead, he thought and said, "You were caught by orc traffickers. You don't have any identification with you, so you might not be able to use normal means of transportation." Lael immediately heaved a sigh of relief and quickly said, "It's okay. We can sneak into the carriage of the train to load goods. This way, we don't have to go through so many troublesome checks. We used to—" She quickly pursed her lips and lowered her head. Luacio thought for a while. He opened his palm, and a document appeared. There was also a mobile phone. He pushed these things in front of Lael. "This is the schedule of the train going through the undersea tunnel tomorrow. In addition, this mobile phone has a translation software. I hope it will be of some help to Miss Lael on your return journey." Lael had already experienced the pain of not being able to speak. She knew about the modern technology and also thought about the translation problem of the mobile phone. However, she was penniless. If she really wanted to get these things in this strange foreign country, she would probably have to resort to illegal means or robbing. The information and the mobile phone had undoubtedly helped her a lot. She was already used to the mysterious magician's ability to make things appear out of thin air. Anyway, she had heard rumors about magicians since she was a child. They were all magicians who had various magical powers. Why, Luacio said, "You can take it as a little self-satisfaction." She didn't remember how she walked out of the study room. She only remembered that the magician's smile was very gentle and the maid's black tea was very fragrant. In the room, Agio was still sleeping soundly. Lael sat at the bedside. Although she was exhausted to the extreme, she still cheered up. She began to look at the documents and mobile phone in her hands, planning to leave tomorrow. In the study room, Luacio returned to the place where he started to read. Miss Maid sat on his lap on the carpet like a cat, lying on his lap. The skirt was loose and round, like a rose. "Master, are we just going to let them go like this?" Miss Maid raised her head. Luacio looked down and touched her face with his fingers. "Before leaving, I wrote a sentence to myself. I'm thinking in a short period of time, if it's not irresistible, I'll try my best to do something that may be unprofitable to pass this stage temporarily." As he said, he raised his left hand. There was a string of agarwood Buddha beads on his wrist. Similar to relief, Luacio smiled and raised Miss Maid's chin. "Don't enterprises also do charity? Self-satisfaction?" Miss Maid's eyes were full of tears. Self-realization. Luacio lowered his head. He started to like the feeling of touching this pair of lips. After a long time, when they separated, Luacio said softly, "When I'm ready, I'll help you get your body back in heaven." "Okay." On the island, an armed helicopter slowly landed. The wind blew the people who were directing the landing. Their clothes fluttered. Finally, the helicopter landed and the cabin door opened. A charming woman wearing a purple dress walked down. She was only one person, the spirit witch, Jillian. At the same time, more than 10 men with guns came from all directions. The muzzles of these guns were undoubtedly pointed at the spirit witch. "I'm just a visitor. Can't I be treated with courtesy?" Jillian let out a soft sigh. At this moment, a brown-haired man in a white suit and sunglasses slowly walked over from behind the gun-wielding man. "We're facing a soul which ranked 5th on the Magician Association's Which Wanted list. I think we're being polite enough. Madame Julien, can I say that this ranking is so high because I was falsely accused? The witch covered her mouth and chuckled. The man in white said indifferently, Ms. Julien, according to Sir Hopkins's instructions, you only have 20 minutes of visiting time. After 20 minutes, no matter if you come out or not, we will close the entrance of the prison. Please watch the time. The witch smiled and said, he is known as the most powerful Grand Knight below the 12 Knights, and he was also born blind. It can be said that he is my nemesis. Am I really that unpopular with Mr. Lino? Please. The man in white. Lino moved to the side. At this time, the men with guns also separated into 2 rows to let the lady pass. She raised her head and looked in front of her. On the small hill of the island, there was a castle built with ancient stone. Julien walked gracefully like a Persian cat. A violet perfume smell was carried by the wind. She wanted to walk to the castle on the hill and whispered. The spacious gate stood majestically. The pillars of solid stone pierced the sky. Heavenly power was as insignificant as human strength. How could a huge building be regarded as a collapsed nest? The fortress of steel was majestic and lofty. What are you talking about? Among the men with guns, one of them seemed to be in a state of extreme tension. At this time, he shouted loudly and his finger on the trigger was almost pressed down. Mr. Lino stretched out his hand and pressed it down. Although he was born blind, in contrast, his other senses were far superior to ordinary people. This is one of the passages in Edinburgh prison. The character Butler chanted at the prison gate when he was rejected for visiting. Lino said indifferently, it's not a spell. Mr. Lino is also a sentimental person. The witch looked back and smiled. As she smiled, the man who shouted at her to stop suddenly screamed in horror. He even dropped the weapon in his hand in panic and screamed, Snake! Snake! Not only was he shocked, but at this moment he seemed to have seen the most terrifying thing, and his whole person was in a state of uncontrollable state. Great Knight Lino frowned and hit the back of the man's neck with his hand, knocking him out on the ground. At the same time, he looked at the witch and said indifferently, Madame Julien, I don't mind including your travel time into the visiting time, if you like to stay here. I want to take back my compliment. The witch turned and set off again, but this time her pace was slightly faster. From a helipad to the castle on the hill, it only took them about half an hour to walk to the castle. At this moment, Lino took out a key from a necklace around his neck. He walked to the castle gate and inserted the key into the hole in the center of the gate. The ancient gate then slowly descended. At the entrance, it was pitch black. Remember, you only have 20 minutes. That person, at this time, if there are no accidents, he should be on the east wing of the tower go. I strongly request that these 20 minutes start from the moment we meet, and not from the moment I step in here. Madame Julien's voice suddenly became calm. Lino acted as if he did not hear her. He waved his hand, and a subordinate took out an electronic timer. After Lino said, start, he pressed the timer button. What a boring and heartless man. The witch looked at him bitterly, then lifted her skirt and walked into the castle gate. Lino closed the gate of the castle once again and stood in front of the gate. He took a deep breath and clenched his fists as if he was holding a sword. He stood there with a serious expression on his face. This is the first time I've seen Mr. Lino so serious. The subordinates whispered to each other. There's nothing we can do about it. After all, the person locked inside is the one who paralyzed almost all the round table mechanisms in Great Britain 100 years ago. He even killed 5 of the 12 round table members. He's the fiercest and most evil knight in history. Can someone really live for so long? I want to say that he's cursed. On the spiral staircase, Madame Julien held an oil lamp in her hand and walked up step by step. This spiral staircase had no end, and no one could see behind her. Only the light of the lamp shone in the darkness. Finally, after more than 10 minutes, Madame which reached the top of the tower. The door in front of her was ajar and was not locked. She pushed it open. In the room, there was only the orange light of the candle. The light and shadow swayed along with the flickering of the candle. On the bluestone wall, there was a shadow. Julien took a deep breath and looked at the shadow on the wall. She was stunned for a moment before she turned to look at the shadow's body. At the only window of the room in the tower, she saw a black-haired man sitting on the windowsill. His hair was long and black, almost reaching the ground. His hands and feet were shackled at the same time. He was holding a small book in his hand. Apparently, before Madam Witch came, he was reading under the light and was still immersed in the world of the book. He heard the sound, so he raised his head, it seemed. Under the candlelight and moonlight, a pale face that was as thin as a patient with terminal anorexia appeared in front of Madam Witch. She opened her mouth and called out softly, "Mordred, Baidu Search 81 Chinese Network. No advertising message." Chapter 1287. The cloud moved, and a thin man, sitting on the windowsill, walked down. The chains on the shackles made a crisp sound. He was really thin, and the shackles on his hands and feet seemed to be heavier than his weight. "Alice." The man called Mordred had a hoarse voice, as if his vocal cords had been burned. "You haven't talked for a long time?" Miss Witch looked at him and shook her head. "But I'm not Alice. I'm her daughter, Jillian." "Daughter?" He looked a little confused, and then he was silent, as if he was recalling something. The witch was also frowning. She seemed to be talking to herself, but also seemed to be talking to him. 60 years of imprisonment and the poison created by the collaboration of 100 secret apothecaries of the Magicians' Association has messed up your mind and memory. Look at me, Mordred. You should remember who you are. He stood there motionlessly, like a skeleton. This castle had a terrible anti-magic ability. She couldn't use any power here. That was why Hopkins agreed to let her visit him. Even so, she was searched very carefully before the visit to make sure that she didn't hide anything. But she still brought something with her. The witch lifted her skirt and put her hand under it. At this moment, there was a sensitive expression on her face. She was in a state of physical pleasure. She sighed slowly, and her eyes were like phosphorescence. She took back her hand, and then there was a small glass bottle. She took the bottle, walked slowly to Mordred, and opened the bottle. "It took me 30 years, and I was wanted by the Magicians' Association for 30 years, to find the materials to make this universal deciphering potion." He didn't move and was completely immersed in his own memories. Seeing this, Miss Witch had to pinch his chin and pour the liquid in the bottle into his mouth. When the potion finally went down his throat and into his body, Miss Witch slowly stepped back. In fact, even she wasn't sure that this potion could break the poison in this man's body. Time passed little by little. Mordred still stood there motionless. Jillian couldn't help but frown. Did she fail? Just as her heart sank, Mordred suddenly showed a pained expression. He grabbed his own neck and knelt on the ground, letting out a painful retching sound. Black liquid was spat out from his mouth just like that, and accompanying it was an unpleasant stench. This type of retching continued. The amount of black liquid Mordred spat out was even more than the amount of water his body was supposed to contain. A lot of time had passed, much longer than the witch's visiting hours. Finally, the black liquid in Mordred's body seemed to have been completely spat out, but he was still clutching his neck with both hands, kneeling on the ground with his head lowered. What's wrong with you, Mordred?" Jillian asked hesitantly. He raised his head and his eyes regained their clarity. At the same time, he slowly stood up. "I'm just sorting out the memories of the past few decades. Are you really Alice's daughter? I inherited my mother's power and am also a soul witch." Jillian nodded. "Perhaps after we leave this castle, I can prove it to you. How do you feel? Has the antidote completely removed the poison in your body?" "About 15% has been removed." Mordred was silent for a while. "But it's enough. Only 15%? How is that possible?" Jillian frowned and coldly snorted. "That damned secret pharmacist. He really didn't try his best." Mordred looked at his hands. "The poison in my body was made by hundreds of secret pharmacists, and there was no lack of secret pharmacists among them. Although I don't know the origin of the secret pharmacist you found, if he could do this alone, he can already be considered a genius. Moreover, 15% is enough." "Really?" Jillian was pleasantly surprised. "Are you sure you can leave this prison? To be honest, this is a gamble. If I can't wake you up, I'm afraid I'll be locked up here forever." The best outcome is that I'll be handed over to the Magician Association by the Round Table. I'll leave here." As he spoke, he also looked at the witch. She didn't see a trace of nostalgia in his eyes. "But before you leave, you need to tell me. Why did you come to me and help me detoxify?" Akshay record. The witch's eyes flashed with fanaticism. She said word by word, "Mordred, I need you to help me get it. A document that can change history." He closed his eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. The witch couldn't help but feel a little nervous. If the man in front of her didn't agree, then all her previous plans would probably... "Okay, I promise you." He opened his eyes and nodded indifferently. "Consider it as a reward for bringing me the antidote. But you have to think about it. You only have this wish. If you use it, it's gone." The witch chuckled. It said that no matter who it is, as long as they can save you from this prison, they can ask you to do one thing. I think my request isn't a waste. Although what I'm using is a favor from the strongest knight, known as a demigod. A demigod? He looked at the witch strangely. Under her puzzled gaze, he said indifferently, "I'm not a demigod for a long time. Let's go. After I help you find the document, I'll come back. The book here, I haven't finished reading yet. Come back." She was shocked. She didn't understand what he meant, but seeing that Mordred had already walked out of the door, she had to quickly follow. However, the shackles and chains on Mordred's hands and legs were still there. Listening to the sound of the chains dragging when he walked, the witch couldn't help but frown. This so-called demigod, the fiercest and evilest knight in history, seemed to be very ordinary. "Mr. Lino, it's been almost an hour." They began to remind Lino, who had been holding his sword since an hour ago, but he didn't respond. He just closed his eyes and was in the most solemn state of alert. The subordinates didn't care. No one had ever been able to walk out of this prison. For the past half a century, all the sinners who were locked in there eventually committed suicide out of madness. Not only because there was a terrifying anti-magic power inside, but also because there were even more powerful guards inside. "Why did you suddenly stop? There's still some distance to the door." The witch couldn't help but frown. She had walked this path before. At that time, she didn't think much of it, but she felt a little depressed because there were many knight statues on both sides of the path. "You should step back a little. It's a little troublesome to go through here," Mordred suddenly said. "Troublesome?" The witch was stunned. He said casually, "These statues contain the heroic souls of the knights who sacrificed themselves in the past. They're at least at the level of a Grand Knight, and there are even 12 Grand Knights. Of course, if they're just heroic souls, they can't be compared to when they were alive." "They these?" The witch frowned. "They're just ordinary statues. For you," Mordred said indifferently. He then took a step forward. "They will only wake up when I try to walk through here." As if to prove what he said, the moment he took another step forward, the statues on both sides of the path suddenly opened their eyes. A strong, murderous aura was emitted from their bodies, and then gathered into a terrifying killing intent. In just a moment, the witch's face turned pale, as if her soul was pierced by countless sharp swords. "This is just the leakage of the aura." Jillian looked at the statues in horror as they came to life. They walked down from the pedestals and pulled out their weapons at the same time. "Impossible to get out. Impossible to get out." Jillian screamed in her heart. Mordred continued to walk forward. "Although I don't know what method you used to get them to let you in and give you this opportunity to visit. But don't think that they are willing to give you a chance because you are smart. It's just because they have absolute confidence. Even if you come in, you can't do anything." She could only smile bitterly. These were the famous Grand Knights and the 12 Round Table. Suddenly, a statue of a knight holding a golden sword slowly walked in front of Mordred. It was at least 2 heads taller than Mordred. Mordred looked up. "Kajin, do you want me to kill you again?" Kajin? Jillian was very familiar with the history of the Grand Knights. She looked at the golden sword in the knight's hand and couldn't help but exclaim, "Kajin, could he be the Golden Sky Knight who inherited the name of Gawain 100 years ago? Kajin Alexander?" Mordred looked back at Jillian. But at this moment, the knight statue in front of him slowly raised the golden sword in its hand and slashed down without any hesitation. "Watch out!" Looking at this scene, she couldn't help but cry out in fear. But at the same time, when the golden sword slashed down, her eyes widened. That golden sword was extremely sharp, and with a portion of the power of a celestial gold knight, it could even easily cut through a steel plate. However, such a sharp golden sword was unable to cut through Mordred's shoulder at this moment. But the enormous force of the sword still caused Mordred's legs to sink into the ground. Could it be that his body was harder than steel? The witch opened her mouth slightly. Since you are already dead, it is better for you to rest in peace. Mordred said indifferently, why should I stay in this world that is already doomed? The statue suddenly opened its mouth and let out a roar. It raised the sword again and slashed down. But this time, Mordred raised his hands, and the shackles on his hands were directly cut off. Mordred's figure instantly disappeared. At least, the witch couldn't see his movements. In the blink of an eye, when she saw Mordred again, he was holding the golden sword in his right hand, and the arm of the golden sky knight statue had disappeared. Rest in peace. It is useless to guard me. As he said that, Mordred squatted down and placed the golden sword behind his back. He suddenly twisted his body, and the golden sword slashed out from behind him. The anti-magic power in the castle seemed to have ignored this man. On the golden sword, a bright light was emitted. Then, the blade of the half-moon surged and swept across. One by one, the statues were sliced apart by the crescent-shaped sword light. The desolate killing intent that made Ji Lian tremble in fear instantly dissipated. In just a few short seconds, the corridor was left with countless pieces of rubble. Streaks of light slowly rose from the shattered statues, then converged, spiraled, and turned into a spiral of light, directly colliding with Mordred. He put down the golden sword in his hand and stretched out his left hand to block the spiral of light. The wind was like a hurricane. The anti-magic power in the castle was still in effect. The witch had no choice but to lean forward. But her body was still blown away by the strong wind. Finally, the strong wind slowly dissipated. When everything calmed down, the witch saw Mordred standing in the middle of countless broken bodies. For a moment, she thought she saw him standing in the middle of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Mordred lowered his head and gently lifted his left hand. In the center of his palm, there was a little light that looked like fireflies circling around. He slowly let out a breath and picked up a bottle from the ground. This bottle seemed to be the weapon of some knight statue. Mordred put the little light into the bottle and slowly walked in front of Ji Lian. Before we leave, help me keep this for me. Her mind was blank. She instinctively took the bottle. This guy, did he really only get rid of 15% of the poison in his body? In front of the gate of the castle, the subordinates who had been waiting for a long time were all frowning. It's here, Head Knight Lino suddenly said. At the same time, he slowly raised his hands. As he raised his hands, some light began to flash on his hands. It turned out that he was not just holding a sword. Instead, he was really holding a transparent sword. Only when the sword moved and refracted light could they see it. It's here, what's here? Everyone was stunned. Boom! Suddenly, there was a loud noise. At this moment, the gate of the castle was directly broken by something. It split into two neat pieces and then directly shot out. Everyone was shocked and almost panicked when they saw this huge and thick gate coming at them. Lino was the only one who didn't retreat at this moment. Instead, he stepped forward and waved the almost transparent sword in his hand. In an instant, he directly cut the two thick pieces of the gate into dozens of small pieces. In the dust, two figures slowly walked out from the shadow of the gate. There was also the sound of the shackles on their feet clanking as they walked. She came out. Spirit Witch. Who was that next to her? Everyone was shocked. The clothes he wore were thin, and many parts of his clothes were worn out due to the passage of time. The man was carrying a big golden sword on his shoulder. Lino took a deep breath and slowly straightened his body. His voice was heavy as he said, "Hundreds of heroic spirits of our ancestors and 100 gold-rank magicians of the Magician Association worked together to set up the anti-magic force field. Is it still unable to stop you? Legendary Knight, Mordred?" It seems that letting this spirit, which visit the prison, was a mistake from the beginning. Mordred tilted his head and looked at Lino. He casually said, "Don't think that this anti-magic force field is useless. After all, it is the product of hundreds of gold-ranked magicians working together. But everything has a time limit, so naturally, there will be a time when it will weaken. In about 30 years, if it is not replenished, this force field will actually disappear by itself." Lino took a deep breath. At this moment, he gave an order that shocked all of his subordinates. He ordered everyone to flee immediately and report the information they had received. "Mr. Lino, this is an order. Leave immediately. You must inform the Knight organization. If anyone doesn't leave, I will immediately strip him of his status as a knight." Everyone gritted their teeth and finally chose to obey this order. However, from the beginning to the end, Mordred did not have any intention of stopping them. Mr. Lino stood in front of Mordred and the spirit witch alone. That almost transparent sword was now flowing with green light. It was no longer invisible. "Wind King, this is an imitation, right?" Mordred looked at it curiously. "You are this generation's prison guard? You can leave. All these years, you have worked hard guarding this prison for me." Great Knight Lino took a deep breath and said seriously, "To be able to battle with a hero from 100 years ago, I don't want to give up this opportunity." "Hero?" Mordred laughed. "It has been a long time since someone called me that." Lino said, "No matter how many sins you have committed in the past, but 100 years ago, you were indeed a hero who participated in that great war. The number of evil souls that died in your hands was uncountable. Although I was not born when that great war happened, I believe that without you, it would have been impossible to win that war. So at the very least, you are a hero who once saved the world. Is that so?" Mordred suddenly lowered his head. His voice was so low that only he could hear it. "After so many years, do you still think that you have one? You really are hopelessly stupid." He suddenly waved the golden sword in his hand. The light of the half-moon sword surged out. Its speed was so fast that Great Knight Lino could only block it. He could not even dodge it. The blade that was flowing with green light was instantly shattered. The half-moon sword slashed his body and blasted him dozens of meters away. Just one hit. Great Knight Lino spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. Chapter 1288. Miraculously, after walking out of the castle gate, Jillian felt that her strength had recovered. It was because her strength had recovered that she once again felt the terror of Mordred. It was as if there were countless wraiths and evil spirits roaring around him at all times. These wraiths and evil spirits even continuously wanted to devour his body. For a moment, Jillian thought of pain, the pain of being crazily bitten. But this seemed to be just a fantasy. When the cold wind blew, what she saw was this ordinary and thin appearance. She looked at Great Knight Lino from afar. This was also a powerful knight, but if it was left to her to deal with him, she could only use a roundabout strategy. "Just now, you should have stopped the other knights as well." Jillian frowned. "At this time, I'm afraid that the fact that you left the prison has already been reported to the Knight mechanism. Forget it. Let's leave this place first. Let's wait for a while more. There's still a few little guys here." As Mordred spoke, she raised her head and looked at the night sky. Miss Witch was startled. She saw that in the night sky, a transport plane had actually stopped at some point. At this time, 3 figures were jumping down from the transport plane. They landed and stood in a triangle. Jillian looked over, and her face immediately turned ugly. The 3 people who came down from the transport plane were the 2 knights of the Round Table that she had met a few hours ago, Gareth and Clown. As for the third person besides Gareth and Clown, there was a woman in a tuxedo standing in the third corner. A smile that wasn't too ugly appeared on Miss Jillian's face, and she flipped her hair. "It seems that my dear Hopkins still doesn't trust me. He actually sent a few people to follow me all the way here. Then, this beautiful lady standing here, since she can move together with Gareth and Mr. Clown, I think she should be the only woman who inherited the name of Lancelot, right? I think that he should have rejected you from the start." Gareth said expressionlessly. His eyes locked on Mordred. In fact, Mr. Clown and Lancelot were the same. They didn't care too much about the Soul Witch. Miss Witch obviously didn't care about their contempt. She just smiled and said, "The people of the myth of Doomsday are still lurking in your country. Instead of going to hunt them down, you escorted me all the way here. Are you not afraid of wasting time?" "That's hard to say. Maybe the threat here is even greater." The clown smiled. Actually, they were all closing in. Gareth Clown and Lancelot were all closing in on her step by step. They had completely blocked off any possible escape routes that Miss Witch could think of. Even though the knight beside her used to be the fiercest and most evil knight, she still felt a little uncertain when facing 3 of the knights of the Round Table at the same time. After all, only 15% of the poison in Mordred's body had been cleared. Even though he had broken the statues of the Grand Knights and former Knights of the Round Table with a single blow, they were only the souls that retained a small part of their power when they were alive. On the other hand, Gareth and the other 2 had completely inherited the power of the Knights of the Round Table and were at the peak of their power. "Are you the 12 knights of this generation?" Mordred looked at them, from Gareth to Clown, then to Lancelot. His gaze finally stopped on Lancelot, and he frowned slightly. Yes, Gareth was reliable in serious situations. At least, he was much more reliable than Clown. "Farrell, please go back to the castle. There are still 793 years left in your sentence." "Farrell." Mordred took a light breath. "It has been a long time since someone called me that. After all, you have been stripped of your title." Mr. Clown's smiling face turned into a crying face. He said in a joking tone, "Even though the knight mechanism has been unable to strip you of your inherited power, it is still suspended until now." "Mordred." Farrell was silent for a while before he slowly said, "I promised this soul witch to do something for her. After it is done, I will come back. What do you think? I don't want to draw my sword against the 12 Round Table here." "In that case," Mr. Clown's crying face turned into a smiling face. "I suddenly thought of a better idea. If this woman dies, then you don't have to go out, right?" Chi. A cold light suddenly shot directly toward the soul witch. It was the throwing knife in Dagonet's hand. However, the soul witch, who had been secretly on guard, didn't panic. Just as she was about to block, the blade of the golden greatsword stood in front of her and blocked the throwing knife. The clown's throwing knife wasn't a real attack. The moment the throwing knife was shot, his figure moved, and the moment the golden greatsword blocked the throwing knife, he was already in front of Farrell and very simply threw a punch at Farrell's face. Although Mr. Clown wasn't tall and didn't look strong among the 12 knights, he was known as the one with the strongest body and the highest pure strength. However, this direct hit was unable to do anything to Farrell. It didn't even manage to shift his face. In an instant, Farrell's head slightly tilted back and then quickly bumped forward. His forehead directly hit the clown's head. Bang! The clown was instantly sent flying backward. He actually overpowered Dagonet in strength. Gareth was shocked, but his reaction was extremely fast. The moment Mr. Clown was sent flying backward, he didn't hesitate to stab with the sword in his hand. The tip of the sword was like a bolt of lightning, rapidly thrusting out 18 consecutive strikes. However, Farrell closed his eyes and easily dodged them. The sword wind that came out from the tip of the sword pierced 18 holes in the wall of the castle behind him at the same time. Not fast enough. The sound rang in Gareth's ears, and a sharp pain spread from his chest in that instant. That was the hilt of the golden sword, which had directly struck Gareth's chest. Like a clown, he was sent flying backwards. In just a few seconds, the moment the clown got up from the ground, Gareth bumped into him head-on. The clown received Gareth's attack. They looked at each other, and then suddenly took out a necklace from their necks. The necklace was the source of the 12 Round Table's power. However, the moment their power of inheritance appeared, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of them. The power of inheritance flowed around their bodies, and with the light on their bodies, it was the holy armor that could trigger the 12 knights' power to descend. Too slow. Too slow. The golden greatsword in Farrell's hand directly struck Gareth and the clown. The holy armor that hadn't completely appeared on their bodies was instantly shattered. Gareth spat out a mouthful of blood. He hadn't even put on the inheritance holy armor, and he was actually knocked to the ground again? What kind of inheritors are there this time? The greatsword in Farrell's hand struck again, and this time, the clown was sent flying into the air. You actually need a second to activate the holy armor. You still dare to call yourselves the Round Table? At the same time, there was a shroud of darkness behind Farrell. Behind him, a black armored knight had appeared out of nowhere. The black armor covered his entire body, and traces of purplish-black light flickered on the black armor. You're not bad, but you're only average. Farrell turned around, and this time, the greatsword didn't strike but slashed. The black armored knight was shocked and raised the sword in his hand to block, but the force of the slash caused half of his body to sink into the ground. A large number of cracks even appeared on the sword in the black armored knight's hand. At the same time, a ripple of impact spread out in an instant, and the trees around the castle were directly knocked down. The ripple only gradually dissipated 100 meters away. This was only an imitation of the inheritance golden sword, and not the real inheritance golden sword. In less than 10 seconds, the three round table were easily defeated by the opponent. Gareth coughed out a mouthful of blood. He had never thought that humans could be so powerful, but he hadn't used the inheritance power yet. Bang! The clown fell from the sky and fell to the ground, but he didn't move at all. He had lost consciousness. Just like this, when the darkness comes again, when they appear again, Farrell muttered to himself, "You won't be able to resist even one of them." The darkness, them? Gareth staggered and stood up with difficulty. Farrell shook his head, and the golden sword in his hand spun in a circle and slashed horizontally. The sword light rushed out 100 meters, and from him, he actually split the island apart. Seeing the seawater pouring in, Gareth felt like he was suffocating, at least to this extent. In the end, the golden sword was casually stabbed into the ground by Farrell, and he left with the witch. The three round table members, or to be exact, the two round table members who were still conscious, didn't have the strength to stop them. Gareth staggered back a step and then fell to the ground. It wasn't because he was afraid, but because his shiong bone was already broken. It's so powerful that it's like a joke. Gareth laughed bitterly. The black armor of the black armored knight, who was half buried in the soil, disappeared. Her delicate facial features were revealed, but she was also pale and bloodless. She raised her head to look at the night sky and saw an armed helicopter slowly rising and then flying away. She was silent for a long time and then slowly said, "Gareth, do you have the strength to pull me out? Please give me at least an hour, or you can wake this clown up." Lancelot, he was so powerful that it was beyond the scope of humans, and according to what he said, he only removed 15% of the poison. In other words, he only had 10% to 20% of his strength now. Yes, absolutely yes. With this person's help, they would definitely be able to obtain that document, Acacia Records. In this world, there is absolutely no one more powerful than him. The face of the witch who was piloting the helicopter was flushed. Her body was in a state of extreme excitement, and she kept looking at Mordred, who was sitting in the back. Or rather, Farrell. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but this man's face didn't seem as thin as before. It seemed like he had gained some flesh. The door of the helicopter was open. Farrell was looking outside, and the seawater below was surging violently. Little bits of fluorescent light fell from the bottle in his hand and fell on the sea. The little bits of fluorescent light gradually dissipated with the waves and finally extinguished. These were the souls of those Grand Knights, the souls of the 12 Grand Knights. Although they were only a part of them, and after losing their carrier, they couldn't be preserved for too long. But wasn't it too wasteful to just scatter them like this? Even so, the witch only opened her mouth and didn't choose to point out the other party's faults. The only one who knew Farrell was only her mother, and she only knew about Farrell's legend through various channels. "Who is your father?" Farrell suddenly asked. Jillian shrugged her shoulders and said, "I have never met him, My mother told me that my father died long ago. Perhaps you can tell me a bit. After all, you seem to know my mother?" Farrell frowned, and after a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "How do you know of the existence of Acacia Records?" Miss Witch narrowed her eyes and said, "This starts with a musician who is obviously very talented, but liked to explore. However, what he obtained was not the Acacia Records, but only a few pages of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I took these few pages of the Dead Sea Scroll from his hands and made a copy. Although the copy doesn't have the power of the scroll, it has the same function as a clue to the Acacia Records. Only a few pages of the Dead Sea Scroll can't be gathered together." Farrell said indifferently, "No one has ever gathered the complete Dead Sea Scroll. You should give up and change to another request." "What?" Even the fiercest and most evil knight in history, Mordred, flinched at the sight of the Dead Sea Scroll. Jillian smiled sweetly. "If that's the case, your heroic appearance of defeating 3 members of the 12 Round Table will be greatly reduced in other people's impression." "You really want to find the Acacia Records?" Farrell suddenly asked. "Otherwise, the reason why I went through so much trouble to save you is obviously not because I worship you like a little girl. After finding the Acacia Records, what do you plan to do?" Farrell asked again. The witch looked at the night sky in front of her and let out a silvery laugh. But it was just a laugh, and she didn't answer. "My name is Farrell." He also looked outside. "Mordred is already dead. It doesn't matter." The witch said softly, "As long as you can help me. Even if you want me to call you my lord, it doesn't matter." Farrell shook his head. "Go to Camlin." "Camlin?" The witch stared blankly. "Isn't that? Why go there?" "Since I want to find the Acacia Records, I naturally need to retrieve some things." Farrell said indifferently, "This scroll has been searching for more than just a little witch like you." "You mean an inhuman?" The witch frowned. "Very strong? Stronger than you? You don't know what true strength is." He slowly closed his eyes, no longer paying attention to the witch. Yin 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 PS1. Looking through the reward records, I found a cute user, the cutest fatso in the world, who served tea to the capitalist boss, as usual. PS2. Then 27 became 29 OZT PS, July 29th. Chapter 1289. On the screen was Gareth's slightly pale face. Sir Hopkins of the Knights of the Fog organization silently listened to his report. "I'm very sorry, Sir Hopkins. We didn't succeed in stopping him from leaving." Sir Hopkins was silent for a moment before he frowned and asked, "Did he really say that he would go back to the castle prison?" Gareth nodded. "He did say that." "I see." Sir Hopkins nodded. "Only the participants on Prison Island know about Farrell's transgression. Issue a gag order to the knights on Prison Island." "But, sir, this is Farrell. He has already left Prison Island?" Garrett's face was full of disbelief. Sir Hopkins shook his head and said rather helplessly, "Since he said that he would come back, then he will definitely come back. He never breaks his promise. But no need to say more." Sir Hopkins waved his hand. "The castle prison can't hold him. The 3 Round Table Knights were like children in front of him, unable to fight back." "Gareth, don't you understand?" Sir Hopkins sighed. "The castle prison. It wasn't us who had the ability to lock Farrell in, but he walked involuntarily." "What?" Ignoring Gareth's current shock, Sir Hopkins said seriously, "Knight Gareth, I'll now give you a new mission. You have 6 hours to rest and hurry on your way. Please go with Dagonet to the operation point where you are responsible for eliminating the myth of Doomsday within the specified time. In addition, tell Lancelot to return to Her Majesty's side as soon as possible and continue her duties." Gareth could only stand at attention and nod in agreement. After the communication with Gareth ended, Sir Hopkins walked into the depths of the manor alone. After passing through layers of tight mechanisms, he finally came to a secret room that only he, the highest person in charge of the Knights of the Fog organization, could enter. Inside the secret chamber was an enormous throne. On top of the throne was a set of silver armor in a sitting posture. It was as if the person was a king. Sir Hopkins slowly walked to the front of the armor on the throne and reached out his hand. His fingers had just touched the armor when Sir Hopkins had to withdraw his hand as if he had been electrocuted. Knight slowly exhaled and muttered to himself, "Mordred, after so many years, you still won't accept anyone other than Farrell?" Farrell, who hadn't even put on his holy armor, had easily defeated Gareth and the other two. A melancholy expression appeared on Sir Hopkins' face. He silently raised his head and looked up from the throne. Behind the throne, there was a huge mural on the wallpaper. On the mural, there was a knight wearing silver holy armor and holding the legendary king's sword, fighting with hundreds of demons. A night passed quietly as the earth rotated on its axis. When he woke up in the morning, Miss Maid had already prepared the toiletries. Even the toothpaste had been squeezed onto the toothbrush. She also prepared a hot towel and stood aside waiting. "I suddenly feel guilty for being an evil feudal lord," Luaccio joked after wiping his face. Miss Maid smiled softly, carefully tidied up her master's clothes, and said that Miss Orc left with her brother at 5:30 in the morning. "So early?" Luaccio blinked. Luaccio really slept. This was something he had never given up. If it wasn't necessary, he wouldn't even wake up before his biological clock. Because there's still some distance from here to the tunnel entrance. She seemed to be afraid of missing the bus. Miss Maid straightened the clothes on Boss Luo's chest and flattened them before showing a satisfied look. "Also, Miss Rin called you half an hour ago." Luaccio nodded and said casually, "Probably because of the terrorist attack." "What did you say?" Miss Maid smiled and said, "I told Miss Rin that you hadn't gotten up yet, and nothing happened in Fog City last night. But she's still quite worried. She's probably asleep by now. After all, they were still 8 time zones apart. I'll send her a text message later." Luaccio nodded and began to eat the breakfast sent by the hotel while planning to leave Fog City. But according to the train information, several main lines in Fog City were temporarily suspended today. Among them, the route prepared by Luaccio was included. It seems to be because of the terrorist attack. Miss Maid spread butter on the bread. However, if we suddenly stop these few days, it may be because the next target of the attack will be on these few routes. Luaccio asked curiously, "How do you know there will be a next attack?" Yi said casually, "Isn't it normal to attack and then make a request? Besides, so far, no so-called terrorist organization is responsible for the attack last night. Doesn't it prove that at least the culprit behind the attack hasn't reached an agreement with the government? Maybe they have made a request, but the government doesn't intend to announce it? That's also because they haven't reached an agreement," Miss Maid said matter-of-factly. "Otherwise, why would they suddenly stop these routes? Isn't it because they need to make some arrangements? Perhaps they already know the next action plan of the culprit behind the scenes and are currently preparing to give the culprit a head-on blow. Finally, I'm afraid it's not an ordinary terrorist organization." Last night, in the eye of Fog City. Luaccio blinked. Last night, going to the Ferris wheel was purely an impromptu thing, but it seemed to have inadvertently disrupted the deployment of the organization behind the attack. Probably the current suspension of the route may be related to the murderer who was shot down by Miss Maid last night. Maybe the night mechanism has gotten some information. "Well," Luaccio thought for a while, "then I'll postpone the trip. I think Peter Chan would be more willing to let me stay for 2 more days. After all, terrorist attacks happened in 4 cities at the same time last night. The whole country had become very nervous since last night. The Song Dynasty Hotel had tightened its surveillance since last night." "Do you want to stay in a hotel for the whole day?" Yi asked softly. Luaccio smiled. "Just put 2 images here. Anyway, I'll stay for a few more days. Let's do something else today. For example, how about watching an opera?" Luaccio looked at the leaflet on the tourist brochure in the room. Miss May took out the leaflet and looked at the poster on it. Tarandit, St. Pancras Railway Station. In the waiting hall, a small figure shuttled through the crowd. It was extremely agile, and often in an instant when people weren't paying attention, it would quickly take something from the front of shop. It only took a little bit each time, a very little bit. After a while, it stopped its action and turned into the emergency passage. After a few turns, it came to a computer room and climbed into the computer room through the vent. In the computer room, Ajia heard the sound and quickly stood up. Our beastman, Miss Lael, jumped down from the air vent and shook her clothes in front of Olga. Instantly, bits and pieces fell from her body. Bread, candies, chocolates. Finally, Miss Lael took out a bottle of water from her collar. Come eat. You didn't eat anything in the morning. You must be hungry. Sister, eat too. They directly sat on the ground and began to eat these spoils of war. Agia picked up the hot dog bread and asked while eating, Sister, when will we get on the train? Soon. The train will depart at 2 p.m. Lael wiped the sauce on Agia's lips with her sleeve. I've observed that we can climb to the track from the vent here. When it's about time, we'll get on the train from the track. After getting on the train, we'll sneak into the cargo compartment. If everything goes well, we'll reach Paris in 2 or 3 hours. Agia ate and suddenly asked, Sister, aren't we going to find Father? Facing her brother's question, Lael didn't say anything. There was one thing that she didn't tell the magician who helped her, and that was how she and Agia were caught by the orc traffickers. She shook her head and hugged Agia into her arms, saying softly, It's too dangerous here. Let's go back. That person, if he really cared about me and you, he wouldn't need us to find him. He would have come back by himself. Agia lowered his head, not knowing what to think. Seeing this, Lael cheered up and said with a smile, Agia, look what I brought you. At this moment, she took out a small and delicate thing from her back pocket and waved it in front of Agia. Harmonica. Putting this delicate harmonica into Agia's hand, Lael said softly, Didn't you lose your harmonica on the ship? I think this is not bad. Do you like it? Yes. Agia liked it so much that he didn't want to let it go. After wiping it with his clothes, he put it to his lips and started to play. This was the song he learned from last night, but he only learned half of it. Original scenery of hometown. Elizabeth Tower. Old name, Big Ben. On the fence on the sightseeing floor of the clock tower, a clear sound came from the man's harmonica. The continuous notes formed a song, Imagine. His lips were very thin, and his hair was flaxen color. He wasn't very strong, but his body was very slender. He was wearing dark blue Baroque-style clothes. He looked like an actor in a stage play, but this era obviously wasn't the era of his clothes. Imagine. Another man slowly walked over. He was the bartender of the tavern where Rant, a senior member of Mythology of the Apocalypse, was killed. He came to the side of the man playing the harmonica and said, John Lennon, I thought you don't like modern music. He continued to play until the song was finished. Then he put down the harmonica and looked at the bartender. Dobuz, is there still no news about Reed? The bartender, Dobuz, shook his head. According to the original plan, Reed was responsible for the Eye of Fog City, but he obviously failed. It is very likely that he has fallen into the hands of the Knights of Fog City. Maybe they already know something from Reed's mouth. The man shook his head and said, I believe in Reed. He has Jillian's spirit protection. No one can go beyond the power of the spirit, which to ask a person, let alone a person with a strong will. In fact, I have some reservations about this spirit witch. Dobuz said indifferently, since the beginning of the plan, I've been unable to contact her. Sir, we don't even know the real plan of this spirit witch. He said, whether she sincerely helps us or has other plans, it has no impact on the plan itself. However, since Reed is missing, let's move the plan forward. 3 days later, Dobuz frowned. The British government may not accept it. What we need is not their compromise, but fear. He looked in the direction of the Platinum Palace, where the Queen was. We have been hiding like rats for too long. Only fear can give us a real land to live on. The bill to leave the European Union has been passed. This country will be isolated and helpless in the future. This will be our best chance. A country where the orcs can live freely under the sun. Dobuz, do you see it? Caesar, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, plan ahead. He turned around, waved his hand, and said in a deep voice, let the myth of the end of the world start from here. Her Majesty's Theater. It was impossible to enter the theater before the ticket was bought. It was impossible for the servant girl. She couldn't let her master enter the theater with the original sin. It's not that serious. Luaccio gently squeezed the servant girl's hand and then held her hand. They followed the crowd and slowly walked into the theater. There was still more than half an hour before the official performance. But even though they had gotten the ticket, the whole process of entering the theater was not too smooth. Boss Luo, who had long been used to his own body, looked at the layers of security at this time without any ripples in his heart. The inspection was so strict, not because of the aftermath of the terrorist attack last night, but because a big shot also came to the theater today. Her Majesty, the Queen of the British Empire. Others did not know that Her Majesty was not in the mood to watch the opera at this time. Her arrival was only the idea of her aides behind the scenes. At such a time, Her Majesty, as the representative of the country, could not show panic. She had to act as if nothing had happened so that the people would not take the attack too seriously. It was commonly known as the whitewash of peace. I should have made up for this year's salary and asked these guys to go back to their hometown. When entering the theater, holding the beloved queen, he did not forget to whisper in the ears of his personal bodyguard, Lancelot. Genius remembered the address of this site in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1290. No matter how dissatisfied the queen was with the idea of the staff this time, since she was here, the security work naturally needed to be done. Even because of this delicate time, the security was even stricter than usual. After the queen entered the special seat, Lancelot began to patrol around. Of course, there were 6 experienced knights guarding the queen, and there were also many security personnel assigned to the queen by the Empire. These knights were temporarily transferred. In the past, the queen would only have Lancelot by her side. In fact, this arrangement was entirely because Lancelot had not recovered. It was only 10 hours since the battle last night. Although she was treated by the medical technology of the Knights of Mist, she was not in a good state at this time. The holy armor was a kind of mysterious power, and the manufacturing technology originated from the Celtic gods. Even if it was damaged, it could automatically repair itself. It would take at least 6 more hours. Feeling the self-repair state of Lainlotte de Lake, the only female member of the Round Table 12, didn't smile at all. She had already patrolled around and returned to the queen's seat again. I haven't found any suspicious people for the time being. Facing the old queen, Lancelot's eyes were calm. Her legs were slightly apart, as she said with her hands behind her back, "Relax, little Lancelot." The queen waved her hand. "In fact, I'm not that important. Really, Lancelot, I'm just an old woman standing in front of people, the so-called dignity of this country." The queen lowered her head and teased her beloved pet, smiled, and said, "Some people really think I'm important. Do you know, I heard an interesting joke last year. A group of terrorists felt that as long as they held my pet hostage, they could make me compromise their demands, so they even planned how to kidnap it." Lancelot's face was expressionless. The queen scratched her beloved pet's chin with her fingers. "You see, they all think you may be more important than a country. My country's dignity is really a joke." Hasn't the performance started yet? At this time, Her Majesty put her handheld glasses in front of her eyes and looked down at the direction of the stage. "There's still half an hour before the official performance, Your Majesty," Lancelot replied with one last sentence. However, at that moment, the queen suddenly stood up from her seat. She bent her waist slightly, as though she was trying to close the distance between her and something. She was looking at something. Lancelot frowned. "Your Majesty, what happened?" At this moment, the queen said slowly, there are really people who look so similar in this world. It's unbelievable." "Queen?" Her Majesty the Queen slowly put down the glasses in her hand and seemed to have fallen into deep thought. She muttered to herself, "So many years have passed. She should have aged even more than me." Suddenly, Her Majesty the Queen turned around and said in a serious tone, "Lancelot, can you help me with something?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The sound of the shutter rang softly. Before the performance started, many seats had similar sounds. Boss Luo's seat was no exception. Of course, it was not for the purpose of posting pictures on WeChat moments. It was just a kind of report to appease Nanny Run on the other side of the hemisphere, who might be sleeping like a dead pig but would be worried when she woke up the next day. Of course, he and Miss Servant Girl entered the world together. Well, maybe she can eat when she wakes up. Luo Chio smiled. and put away his mobile phone. Then he looked at the servant girl beside him and suddenly thought of something interesting. He asked softly, "Is there anything you dislike about this country? Why do you say so?" Yi blinked. Luochio began to play with Miss Servant Girl's fingers. "You know what I'm talking about?" "Yes." Miss Servant Girl shook her head and put her hand on her chest, saying softly, "She just exists in several similar subworlds and experiences similar things, but I have more. This small part of dissatisfaction has disappeared a long time ago. Legend and uniqueness. It was as if it had appeared in multiple subworlds. In the instant that it appeared, everything that had been praised would be unified. Thousands of worlds could become the only independent one. It was the same for Miss Servant Girl. The former national hero, the New Orleans girl, was just a part of her past." And Yi smiled faintly. "I've already helped her get her revenge." When Boss Luo was about to show a puzzled expression, someone walked slowly. She came to Luochio and Miss Servant Girl on the stairs. It was a lady in a tuxedo. Her lips seemed a little pale, and her facial features were exquisite. "Miss, is it convenient for you to come upstairs? Someone wants to see you," she said in a low voice. Birmingham, Victoria Square. During the day, whether it was tourists or local residents, they all liked to wander around here. It was the most crowded time of the day. Two men, one in a suit and the other in a worker's uniform, met unexpectedly in the square and then walked up the stairs side by side. The two of them only had eye contact. But right at this moment, a black shadow appeared behind the two of them. They keenly sensed something, but before they could react, their shoulders were directly placed on by someone. Between them, a bearded man stretched out his head and said in a tone like meeting an old friend, "Are you two interested in having a cup of coffee in Birmingham's Knight's Mechanism?" The two were suddenly shocked, and many thoughts flashed in their minds, but they finally pointed to one. They were exposed, and it was the leader who decided to take action in advance more than an hour ago. "You are Tristan." Tristan, the 12 knights stationed in Birmingham. The man in the worker's uniform, almost at this time, recognized the bearded man's origin. But before the two of them could resist, the bearded man knocked their heads together without saying a word. After seeing stars, they fainted. Seeing that the two were about to fall to the ground, the bearded man supported them with one hand and said exaggeratedly, "Are you two drunk in broad daylight? You two drunkards. Don't expect me to send you home." The result of such a performance was no one cared. In this way, the bearded man carried the two people and the bags in their hands and calmly left the square. He threw the two fainted people into a small truck. In this industrial city, such a small truck was too common. He also walked into the container, but it was not really a place to load goods, but a variety of instruments and screens were placed. "Oh, Mr. Tristan, have you already subdued the two thugs from Myth of Doomsday? That's fast." The bearded man shrugged and said, "It seems that the ones responsible for attacking here are just two small characters." At the same time, he opened the bags carried by the two men and looked at the things inside. It's actually a portable explosion tactic, a 1978 product of the Magician Association. If this thing explodes in the square, even a small character can cause a lot of trouble. In any case, you have successfully organized them. The subordinates in the container were obviously relieved, although it seemed very simple, and even without bloodshed. If it was not for the information sent by the Knights of Fog, I'm afraid that they would only be aware of the disaster after the square. The danger was naturally only understood by the Knights of Fog. However, they think that they really took action in advance. The bearded man, Tresty, said thoughtfully, "It seems that they have already guessed that Reed was caught and even gave out the information. I hope everything else goes well." With that, he waved his hand, and the subordinates understood and said in a deep voice, "Retreat." City of Glasgow, in a building next to the Glasgow Central Railway Station. The position of the 4th floor. Like an explosion caused by a gas leak, all the glass windows on the entire floor were shattered in an instant. A large number of glass chips fell to the ground, and pedestrians screamed. In the destroyed 4th floor, there were 5 men with burns all over their bodies and eyes. Moreover, they had lost consciousness and were scattered all over the place. Here, only a young man in a police uniform was left standing. He still grabbed the back collar of the sixth man, carried him, and walked out. Mr. Geraint. Several knights of the Glasgow City Knights of Fog hurriedly ran down the stairs at this time. The man in the police uniform threw down the man in his hand and said frivolously, "I'll leave the cleaning to you. I have to continue patrolling the streets." With that, Mr. Geraint jumped out of the window. An armored vehicle with the logo of the highway police was parked here. Mr. Geraint got on the car and put on his helmet. He really went to patrol. Horrified screams came out in the dark tunnel and kept echoing. Suddenly, a dark red light appeared. In the tunnel, several figures ran crazily. 3 men and 2 women. Behind them, there seemed to be something terrible chasing them, so that their faces were full of fear. Suddenly, one of their companions fell to the ground. On the back of his fallen comrade, there was a bright throwing knife stuck in his back. The sound of heavy armor walking came little by little from the tunnel. They seemed to be stuck by something at this time and couldn't move. Finally, a figure wearing golden armor, whose entire body was emitting a chaotic and ruthless aura, entered their line of sight. And this fellow wearing golden armor had bright throwing knives clamped between his 10 fingers. The flying knives shot out and cold light flashed. After a few screams, these men and women fell to the ground one after another. Their throats had been pierced through by the flying knives. In the next second, a figure in azure armor arrived quickly, but he seemed to be one step too slow. Dagonet, I said to keep him alive. Light and shadow dispersed from his body. The azure armor split open, revealing Gareth inside. At the same time, the golden armor dispersed as well. Mr. Clown could be heard crying as he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't notice, Dagonite. Just kidding, just kidding." Clown jumped behind the man who was stabbed in the back, turned him over, put on a smiling face, and said, "Here, you want him alive." "It's really—" Gareth rubbed his forehead, and at the same time, looked behind Dagonite in distress. This tunnel was full of potholes left by destruction. It would take more than a day to repair it. Gareth had to take out the phone helplessly. "It's me, Gareth. This gangster is also subdued." "Yes, I know. In addition, I suggest that the trains on this line stop temporarily. I don't think there's any way for the Eurostar to leave today." Gareth was on the phone. "Really? Tristan, has Geraint completed the task?" "Very well. Then there's only one left." "Dagonite?" "Dagonite." But Dagonite on the side put his hands behind his head, whistling, "Hissel." Gone. Gareth could only see his back disappearing into the darkness. Lancelot led the way in the corridor. Behind her, Miss Maid and Boss Luo followed slowly. According to Lancelot's original intention, the Queen only invited this lady, and her male companion didn't need to follow. But when she invited, Lancelot unexpectedly changed her mind. She seemed to find it difficult to ignore the existence of the young man behind her. "Lancelot, is she one of the legendary knights of the Round Table?" Lancelot frowned, stopped, and turned around. It was Luaccio who asked. Boss Luo smiled slightly at this time. "Sorry, I'm interested in this legend these 2 days, so I read more about the Knights of the Round Table. I really don't mean to offend you, but I'm really curious about this name. Generally, ladies rarely use such a name." "Wait." Lancelot suddenly spoke. Luaccio blinked. She said indifferently, "Wait, please wait outside the door." Luaccio opened his mouth. Miss Maid narrowed her eyes at this time and was about to speak. Luaccio waved his hand slightly and whispered in her ear, "I want to talk to her alone. You go in by yourself." Miss Maid glanced at Lancelot, then nodded thoughtfully. They didn't speak for the rest of the way. Lancelot seemed to have completely forgotten Luaccio's question about the name until they finally arrived at the destination. She opened the door and made an inviting gesture, letting Miss Maid walk into the Queen's special seat alone. She slowly closed the door, then stood outside the door like a sculpture. Boss Luo looked at Lancelot at this time and asked with a smile, "Miss Lancelot, how old are you this year?" She seemed to be a little astonished, looking at Luaccio, and couldn't help opening her mouth slightly. At the same time, in the room, when Miss Maid appeared in front of Her Majesty, the dignified queen of the country couldn't help but shake her old face. She stood up from her seat at once. Teacher? Little Elizabeth, long time no see. Chapter 1291. 1936, Winter. The Duke of York, who had succeeded to the throne, and his wife, as well as his two daughters, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, were hiding in Balmoral Castle from the Second World War. Princess Elizabeth was only 13 years old. The Duke of York was reading the newspaper in his hand. After a silent breakfast, the young and immature Princess Elizabeth suddenly said, "Father, are we going to hide here and do nothing?" The Duchess, the Queen, gave her a look of silence, but it didn't stop the young princess from speaking. "Our country's name is being sacrificed on the continent across the ocean, and we're enjoying the warmth of the fireplace in this castle. Elizabeth," the Queen's voice was slightly heavier, "don't add to your father's troubles." The Queen's tone was already stern, and the young princess could only reluctantly lower her head. As for the even younger Princess Margaret, at this moment, she was only hugging her doll and looking at all of this in horror. "Then, I'll go back to my room first." Princess Elizabeth stood up and left. "Elizabeth, have you forgotten the etiquette of royalty?" The Queen couldn't help but frown. The princess said calmly, "Mother, I want to learn fencing, horsemanship, and strategy, not to study Shakespeare's words." The Queen was furious. But at this moment, the new king, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. He put down the newspaper and spoke slowly. "Why, Elizabeth, you've reached the age where you should go to school. But considering the current situation, I've specially hired a tutor for you. Go, your tutor is waiting in the study. I hope you can show the etiquette that a royal princess should have and accept your new tutor." "I don't need a tutor, father. This is an order. This tutor will teach you." The new king looked at his eldest princess with a complicated expression. "You'll never know what price I pay to hire this tutor for you. Cherish it. This tutor will change your life, if you don't want to live a mediocre life." Although her conflicting emotions almost overcame her obedience to her father, the young princess was defeated by her mother's attack. She reluctantly came to the door of the study. She didn't yearn for the tutor that her father said was very powerful. She was thinking of how to make the tutor back off. Taking a deep breath, the young princess pushed open the door of the study and said loudly, "Where's the new tutor?" As she spoke, the princess observed the situation in the study. She expected the tutor to be someone who wore a pair of glasses and looked elegant or knowledgeable. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her father to hire him. However, the person who appeared in front of the princess wasn't a literary type, but a young woman. She had long golden hair, dark blue eyes, and a faint smile. You're my tutor?" The beautiful young woman didn't answer. She just picked up a heavy sword used for fencing from the table and threw it at the princess. The princess caught it in a hurry. While she was puzzled, the blonde woman in front of her picked up the same heavy sword and said indifferently, "In 10 minutes, if you can touch any part of my clothes, I'll leave here. How about it?" God, the princess didn't even know how the other party pulled out 2 heavy swords in the study. But that wasn't important. What was important was that fencing was something she loved. "No, I'll call for help." The princess's eyes suddenly became sharp. Memories flashed through her mind. The Queen, who had aged a long time ago, reached out and touched her cheek. It was cold and moist. "Little Elizabeth, long time no see, it's really you, sensei?" The Queen staggered forward step by step. "It's been so many years. Am I really seeing you again? But why haven't you changed at all, and I'm not young anymore. Please tell me this isn't a dream." Perhaps it was because of excitement, or perhaps it was because of joy. The old Queen couldn't help but reach out her hands, wanting to hold the face in front of her. Trembling. This should be a very touching scene, at least for the Queen, who was excited at this moment. The joy at this moment was comparable to the victory of the World War decades ago. "This beautiful woman who changed her life, did I allow you to touch me, Elizabeth?" His deep blue eyes were just as deep as she remembered them. However, upon hearing these cold words, Her Majesty seemed to have woken up in an instant. However, an almost instinctive fear still made Her Majesty, who had chatted and laughed with countless leaders and heads of state in the world without changing her expression, shiver. Her sword was very heavy, and the young princess had suffered unimaginable pain. At the same time, her pointer was just as heavy. It was like a nightmare that made the young princess unable to forget until she became the queen of a country. But this also made the queen completely wake up. After all, she wasn't the little girl who didn't know anything. Why? Your appearance. Now you're the queen, and at the same time, you know the existence of the night mechanism. You know the extraordinary power in the world. Don't you understand? The queen opened her mouth. This was a possibility she had never thought of. She needed some time to digest the information, and the room fell into silence. Miss Lancelot, how old are you this year? In her impression, this was the first time she encountered such a question. Of course, it wasn't that she had never encountered such a question before. It was just that she had never been asked this question from the beginning. There's no need to answer, she thought. 25. Her eyes suddenly changed at this moment and keenly captured this moment of separation between thoughts and words. Lancelot's eyes suddenly became sharp, and a short sword slipped out from her sleeve. Wrong body. She had already appeared behind Boss Luo, and the short sword went over his shoulder and was placed on his neck. At the same time, her cold voice sounded, "What did you do to me?" I think I really just asked a question. Luocio seemed to have a normal reaction, but he couldn't do it. Not to mention this short sword. Even a sharper ice blade would not be able to cut through his skin. Moreover, it was unknown whether or not it would even be possible to cut through his skin. But if there really came a day when a sharp blade pierced into his body, he would also be reborn in the club. He had already tried to come back from the dead from the very beginning. Don't play tricks. Lancelot's voice became colder. The short sword was still held. Luocio smiled at this moment and calmly said, "It's so strange. Logically speaking, if I really made you feel danger, shouldn't you be more concerned about the situation in the room? After all, there are people you want to protect, and at the same time, there's also my companion who made you feel the danger approaching. Shouldn't it show that ensuring the safety of the person should be the first priority? Make a choice." It seemed to be this saying. Give up the controlled person to enter the room and deal with the current situation. Follow the queen's safety as the most important thing, or not give up controlling the opponent. She quickly made a choice. If your companions have really threatened my employer's safety, then all the more reason I shouldn't give up on you. At the very least, I should control you. Only then can we be considered on the same starting line, right? That's true. What made Lancelot surprised was that he agreed with her. What was more inconceivable was that he seemed to have concluded that she really wouldn't make a move. At this moment, he turned around. The short sword that was originally held on his neck had now become the tip of the sword that was pointed at his throat. 25 years. Luocio said casually, "Actually, it's longer than my life. Miss Lancelot, in these 25 years, are there any memories worth remembering and treasuring?" She couldn't help but frown. This was the second strange question. "I think that you don't need to worry about whether or not there are any treasures in my memories. You should worry about yourself." She chose to make a move in her usual way. Of course, in order to ensure that the situation wouldn't worsen, she didn't intend to kill him, but she wanted to at least make him quiet down. His throat was a fatal place, so she didn't intend to attack. But other than that, perhaps his shoulders and thighs would be good targets to attack. At the very least, she wanted to impair his mobility. She only thought for a moment, and her body's movements were almost synchronized with her thoughts. The moment she came to a conclusion, Lancelot flicked her wrist and stabbed the short sword towards his shoulder blade. It should have been like this, but the short sword didn't move at all. It was as if it had stabbed into an invisible wall and was completely stable. It was more like a tightened screw that was fixed in the air. Lancelot was shocked and let go of the short sword. She instinctively retreated, but her body was unable to move. And the short sword was fixed in the air between her and Luocio. Luocio looked at Lancelot, then stretched out his hand and plucked the short sword from the air. He played with it in his hand. "For now, I won't bring danger to the one in the room, including my companions." She naturally didn't believe him, and she didn't even let down her guard. At least that was what her eyes showed. But at this time, the short sword in Luacio's hand began to melt. It completely melted into a lump of molten steel. Then it began to automatically stretch, twist, and change shape. Finally, it became a silver rose. If you don't have it, then start creating it now. If you already have it, I hope you can treasure it well. Luacio returned the metal rose to Lancelot's hand. To be precise, it was inserted into her empty palm. She could move now. Lancelot's body moved at once. But at this time, the door suddenly opened. Miss Maid walked out with a smile, and Her Majesty the Queen sent her off in fear and trepidation. Yes, in fear and trepidation. Go back, Elizabeth. Don't ask too much about me. Remember my words. Yes. Her Majesty the Queen nodded. She really didn't ask more, even though she was very curious about the man who was Yu Ye's male companion. Of course, she also wanted to know why Lancelot had a metal rose in her hand at this time. You don't have to send me off, Miss Maid said again at this time. Her Majesty the Queen nodded. She looked like an obedient student, which made Lancelot feel even more incredible than Farrell's easy defeat last night. Luacio didn't intend to talk to Her Majesty the Queen. He just nodded slightly. His arm bent slightly, and Yi came to his side and held his hand. Well, the performance should start soon. Please allow us to leave first, madam. Luacio concluded with this. Your Majesty the Queen, may I ask who they are? In front of the door, the mysterious man and woman had disappeared in the corridor, but Lancelot's doubts were obviously stronger. She began to doubt her own strength as a member of the Round Table 12. First, it was Farrell, and unexpectedly, Her Majesty the Queen shook her head at this time. Lancelot, I hope you won't tell anyone about what happened today about me and her. She frowned, but Her Majesty the Queen didn't want to say more. Instead, she looked at the metal rose in Lancelot's hand again and smiled. Oh, child, for the first time, I feel that the flower suits you very well. Don't you think it would be better for you to change into a lady's dress? Without waiting for an answer, Her Majesty the Queen walked into the banquet with a chuckle. Lancelot looked at the metal rose in her hand. She was stunned. In the corridor, the boss and his female companion were still walking hand in hand. So, this is what you meant when you said you had already taken your revenge. Boss Luo smiled at this time. It must have left a deep impression on Her Majesty the Queen's childhood. I suddenly want to see you as a strict teacher. It's just the request of the Duke of York. Miss Servant Girl smiled. But as a home teacher, I think it's a pass. The former New Orleans girl actually trained the Queen of Great Britain by herself. Luo Chio shook his head. He didn't know who had such a bad taste. Miss Servant Girl didn't say anything about this. She smiled and said, Master, did you have a good chat with number 31? I hope she can wake up later. After all, this time, I didn't come to look for her specially. It's a coincidence to meet her. Luacio muttered, let's wait and see. After all, the boss who disturbs the employee's vacation will probably be hated. Then, cancel her right for the next vacation. Miss Servant Girl said lightly. Hey. Chapter 1292. Attentees. Due to the track malfunction, the Star of Europe will be suspended from now on. Passengers who have purchased tickets, please proceed. Attentees. They were suddenly in a mess as they made a ruckus in the waiting hall of the train station. How could this be? The Orc girl looked at the translation software on her phone in surprise. She was preparing to log in to the Star of Europe as an extra method. She couldn't help but frown. Sister, what's going on? The Orc girl didn't say anything. She just put on Oga's hood and quickly pulled him to a place where no one was around while explaining what happened. Malfunction. Oga was quite surprised when he heard the reason. He couldn't understand English, but he could see the time on the electronic clocks that were everywhere. Then let me see if there are any other routes. Don't worry, there will be a way. The Orc girl comforted him softly. We can just wait until the repairs are done. This route won't be closed forever. Maybe we'll be fine tomorrow. Although that was the case, she felt that it was quite dangerous to be chased by people in this foreign country for one more day. Other routes? Other than this underwater tunnel that crosses the ocean, where else could there be? Taking a boat. She didn't want to take a boat anymore. Not only was she traumatized after being caught by the orc traffickers, but she was also instinctively afraid of the ocean. She was an orc who couldn't swim and was afraid of water. As for the plane, obviously, it wasn't as convenient as taking the train. Let's leave here first. The orc girl pulled Olga and left the train station while the passengers were in a mess. The Queen's Theater, Her Majesty the Queen's Banquet. Okay, I understand. After putting down the phone, Lancelot came to Her Majesty the Queen's side. Looking at Her Majesty, who seemed to be a little absent-minded at the moment, he said, "Mr. Hopkins called. The Knights organization in various places has successfully captured all the members of the Myth of Doomsday on the attack list obtained from Reed's mouth. Because it was deployed in advance, there was only 1 seriously injured and 4 lightly injured." Oh, that's good. Although she was absent-minded, Her Majesty had obviously received the message. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. "Thank you for saving our country again." For this queen, although the current political system did not allow her to have the authority that a monarch should have, it was clear that she did not wish to become a monarch who was threatened by others and eventually divided the country, thus leaving a stain on her name. "I should reward the person who successfully captured Rend. Don't you think so, Lancelot?" The queen's mood seemed to have improved a lot. She even smiled more often. "Perhaps it would be better for you to discuss it with Mr. Hopkins," Lancelot said slowly. "Although we've arrested almost all the members of Mythical Doomsday who were active in our country. According to the intelligence, the leader of this organization and a few other key members have yet to show up. Therefore, this matter might not be over yet." Her Majesty seemed to have recalled the past. As she slowly combed her pet's fur, she said slowly, "In my life, I've seen many so-called revolutionary parties and underground organizations. They all have one thing in common. Do you know what it is?" She glanced at Lancelot, whose expression did not change at all. She smiled and said, "That is, they all value their companions very much. If Mr. Hopkins and the other people in charge of the Knights organization are smart, perhaps they could try to publicly execute these captured thugs." Lancelot opened her mouth slightly. She had been protecting the queen closely for the past 2 years. Most of the time, the queen had an amiable image, an image that her people needed. Even for Lancelot, who had known the queen for such a long time, most of the time, the queen was indifferent, as if she did not know anything and did not want to care about anything. However, after all, the queen had experienced the baptism of war and was currently the longest-serving queen in the world. Oh, the show has finally begun. Her Majesty suddenly picked up the handheld glasses at this time. Finally, it's time. She seemed to be unwilling to continue the previous topic. Her interest had been attracted by the slowly rising curtain. Lancelot followed the queen's gaze. While looking at the stage below, she subconsciously glanced at other places, but she did not see the mysterious man and woman. Behind the queen, Lancelot took out the metal rose and fell into deep thought. At this time, it was quiet all around. On the stage, under the dim light, as the curtain rose, the low voice of the prologue slowly sounded. "Princess Tyrandit of the Xiong Kingdom, as beautiful as peach blossoms, as cold as frost. The prince of the royal family is obsessed with the love of beauty. A single woman with a heart of steel, testing the prince consort with 3 difficult questions, a butcher's knife flashing cold light. Different from the story of the brass band, the human voice, and the symphony orchestra on the stage, the back of the stage was much more chaotic. No matter the actors who were preparing to go on stage, the actors who had just stepped off the stage and were busy changing clothes, the staff responsible for props, or the backstage director, everyone was in an urgent and tense atmosphere. With the development of the plot, there were obviously more and more things that needed to be taken into consideration. Caesar. Caesar? Who can tell me where Caesar is? It's his turn to go on stage. Who can tell me where the missing male lead is? The manager of the troupe was as anxious as ants on a hot pan. Not to mention the usual situation, he would be furious when he couldn't find the actor before the performance, let alone this was the most important male lead role. What's more, Her Majesty the Queen of Britain was here today. If something went wrong, he would be fired as the manager. You didn't see him? Hurry up and bring him back. The manager of the troupe flew into a rage. 3 minutes. I'll only give you 3 minutes. If you can't find him, don't let him come back. Pastor, get ready. If Caesar doesn't show up in 3 minutes, you replace him. You're the male lead tonight. Changing the lead actor at the last minute. And it was the most important male lead in the play. This was probably only slightly better than messing up the performance. The manager of the troupe kicked the prop clothes rack rather inelegantly. Why aren't you looking for it? Failure. Failure. Team annihilation. Failure. On the screen of the mobile phone, messages flooded in. They were all sent by the same name, Dobas. The man was silent from the beginning to the end. He was wearing an ancient Chinese costume with strong Western elements. Caesar. He was the actor of Caffra, the male lead of Tyrannid troupe. He was not the only one here. There was another old man in the same costume who was the actor of Prince Caliph's father. Caesar, Doba's information can't be wrong. We failed this time. The old man's face was heavy. Sure enough, the night mechanism has pried open Reed's mouth. They already know everything about us. How do they pry open Reed's mouth in such a short time? He's the kind of guy who will keep the secret even if he dies. The man with flaxen hair. Caesar slowly put on his costume hat. He even prepared his makeup in front of the mirror. Let's prepare for the performance last time. Caesar. Most of our companions have been caught by the night mechanism. They may not keep their mouths shut. Look, even Reed's mouth was pried open. Our whereabouts may have been leaked. Retreat, Caesar. We can still accumulate strength and wait for the next opportunity. He had finished his makeup and stood up. Judas, do you know why the Queen suddenly came to this theater today? Do you have a backup plan? Under the old man's surprised gaze, Caesar pushed the door open and walked out. On the side of the stage, 3 minutes had passed. Under the anger of the troupe manager, the performance was delayed for another minute. There's no other way. Pastor, get on the stage now. Don't mess up the performance, or I'll poke your ass with a wooden stick. The young man's face was as bitter as a bitter gourd after being squeezed with salt powder. He was even pushed by the troupe manager from behind. Wait, Caesar is here. Oh, my God, he's on the stage. This wasn't the Metropolis version of Tyrannid, so they didn't use the sea of people tactic. However, there were many actors on the stage. The lights moved to the center of the stage, and a handsome man slowly walked down from the stage steps. He became the focus of everyone's gazes. The music began to play under the conductor's baton. This was the first scene of Prince Caliph's appearance. It was about Prince Caliph's unexpected reunion with his old father in King City. Under the dazzling lights, His Royal Highness sang slowly with a low voice that gradually rose to a high pitch. Disappear the night. The stars were sinking. The stars were sinking. I'll win at dawn. I'll win. I'll win. The instrument stopped, and the conductor's baton froze in the air as if it was difficult to wave it. The performance of the orchestra also stopped. Under the surprised gaze of the audience, only the solo of the handsome man under the stage lights could be heard. This is the last part of No One Sleeps Tonight. Is Caesar crazy? The theater manager froze as if he had been struck by lightning. This guy didn't follow the script. Instead, he sang the last few songs. He felt the world was spinning. He didn't know how to deal with this sudden crisis. Oh my God, Pastu, knock me out with your wooden stick. Where did I get the wooden stick? Lancelot, tell me, did I miss the first part of the song? If I'm not senile, this should be the last song. During the banquet, the Queen put down her glasses in surprise and looked back blankly, only to find that her guardian knight wasn't listening to the performance attentively. She just looked at the metal rose in her hand silently, as if she was absent-minded. What should I say? Different from the temporary confusion of the audience, Boss Luo, who was sitting in a corner of the public seats, blinked and then turned to look at his maid. Is it really not suitable for me to walk around? The servant girl didn't have much expression on her face. She just looked at the stage with her eyes moving slightly. But at this moment, a lot of smoke suddenly appeared around the stage. It wasn't special smoke, but a substance that would make people unconscious after inhaling it. The audience in the front row had inadvertently inhaled the gas and fell down on their seats. At this moment, people began to panic. They stood up in horror, pushing each other and screaming in horror. However, not only under the stage, but also at the ventilation ducts around the stage, the fainting gas also came out. The audience fell down one by one. On the stage, the actors had already fainted, including the people on both sides of the stage. At this moment, only the actor who played Prince Caliph and the old man who played the prince's father were still standing among the many people who had fallen down. He was still singing loudly. Fate is as changeable as the moon, alternating between full and empty. The abominable life intertwines misery and happiness. No matter poor or rich, they all melt and disappear like ice and snow. The terrible and empty wheel of fate, you turn mercilessly. You are vicious and cruel, destroying all the happiness and beautiful expectations. The shadow shrouds the blurred, and you also knock me down. Disaster comes, and my back is mercilessly crushed by you. Fate destroys my health and will, mercilessly strikes, brutally oppresses, and enslaves me. At this moment, don't hesitate. For the most senseless warrior who has been beaten down by fate, let the strings of the harp resound, and weep with me in sorrow. Stop! His voice echoed in the theater. The thick fog slowly sank, then diluted in the air and gradually dissipated. Caesar slowly sighed. Suddenly, a clear round of applause rang out in the deathly, silent theater. Everyone should have fainted. At the moment of applause, both Caesar and the old man beside him, Judas, looked at the direction of the applause in surprise. On the seats of the stairs, among the people who had fallen down, they could see two people sitting in their seats, sober. The applause came from one of the sober young men. Luccio's hands. It wasn't just to attract the attention of the singer on the stage. Boss Luo's applause stopped after a while. Excuse me, is there anything else? Chapter 1293. When the song came, in the smog, in the audience where the queen was sitting, Lancelot immediately pulled the queen back. At the same time, she quickly took out a handkerchief and wet it with red wine. Cover your mouth and nose, it's better than nothing. Lancelot quickly said and then rushed out of the door, but she closed the door almost instantly and returned to the queen's side. Outside, the queen was not too anxious, but she quickly asked. They were knocked to the ground. Lancelot frowned and carelessly stroked his palm across his chest to check on the divine armor's recovery. It's not fully recovered. At most, it only has basic combat power. She walked to the audience again and saw that the whole place was covered by the thick smog. She could faintly hear the high-pitched song from the smog. At the same time, the phone signal was blocked. The sound of cutting was suddenly heard. Lancelot turned around and protected the queen behind her. The door in front of her was cut into several pieces and then fell down. A black-haired woman wearing a purple leather jacket, who seemed to be of Asian descent, slowly walked in. The woman's left and right hands were holding a foot-long short sword. At the same time, there was a thin and long scar on the left side of her face. It seems that this was premeditated. The queen frowned. It seems that among my staff, there are people who are bribed by you, right? As expected of your majesty, you thought of the answer so quickly. The woman in purple who was holding two short swords smiled. In that case, your majesty, you might as well not resist. This way, I will have a lot of time left. You are a member of mythology of Doomsday. Lancelot asked coldly. After noticing the scar on the woman's face that ruined her beauty, Lancelot quickly found out the woman's origin from the intelligence. You're a senior member of mythology of Doomsday, Nicomeda. Catherine, you've answered correctly. Then, I'll reward you later. The purple-clothed woman, Catherine, narrowed her eyes slightly. Lancelot maintained her composure and said, As long as you think you can defeat me. She waved her arm, and a beam of light slowly emerged from the center of her palm. Shockingly, it was a silver-black longsword. However, there were many cracks on the longsword's blade, as if it would shatter at any moment. I can't say for the other 12 knights, but if it's you, Catherine chuckled. She gained the upper hand by a show of strength. She lowered her body and sprinted forward. However, this speed was clearly not something that Lancelot was afraid of. In fact, it could even be said that this speed was slow. The long sword in Lancelot's hand easily deflected the opponent's dagger and stabbed towards the opponent's chest. However, what left Lancelot at a loss was that the sword in her hand, which was forged together with the holy armor, actually shattered the moment it was about to pierce into the opponent's body. It shouldn't be. Even if it wasn't completely repaired, at least in terms of strength, it should be stronger than a standard sword in perfect condition. At the moment when the sword shattered, Lancelot's reaction was also extremely fast. Once again, the shattered sword reformed. It was still a sword full of cracks. However, this time, Catherine didn't even move, allowing Lancelot's sword to stab toward her body. The sword shattered once again. Lancelot looked at the sword that had shattered twice in disbelief. Finally, she couldn't maintain a calm expression on her face. "Don't you find it strange that this indestructible lake light has no effect on me?" Catherine smiled slightly. "No matter how many times, your weapon can't hurt me. Do you believe it? What are you wearing?" Lancelot took a deep breath. Finally, with her sharp sense of magic, she finally noticed that Catherine seemed to be wearing something. It was this thing that blocked the attack of the indestructible lake light. Catherine said softly, "Holy armor, Guinevere's repentance." As she said, a gray robe appeared on Catherine's body. It looked like a nun's costume. "It really exists." Lancelot looked at her in disbelief, finally showing a frightened expression. "As the relic of his beloved woman, I asked this sinner, how can he hurt it?" Catherine sneered. "You can't use the power of the Knights of the Round Table. How much power do you have left? It's enough to deal with you." The female knight suddenly waved her hand again. Since it was a spiritual equipment that could restrain her holy armor, then she didn't need to use the power of holy armor. However, after this attack, Lancelot had a feeling of wanting to die. What she waved was the short sword that she should have carried with her as a backup. But what she waved was an ornament that was molded into a metal rose. The scene was silent. Catherine was stunned. She stared blankly at Lancelot, who was pointing the metal rose at her, looking valiant and heroic. Both sides were silent for a while. "It looks like you really think that I'm easier to deal with." Catherine woke up from her daze, and there was a surge of anger in her heart from being underestimated. "I don't have time to play games with you here." While Lancelot was distracted, she dodged and took advantage of the moment. Catherine appeared from the queen's shadow like a ghost. The ice blade in her hand was directly placed on the queen's shoulder. At the same time, she whispered in the queen's ear, "Don't move. Otherwise, perhaps the crown prince will inherit the throne tomorrow. I think that he will be very happy to do so." "Oh, I think so too, Miss Catherine." The queen gave Lancelot a look, indicating that she should not act rashly. The truth was, this female knight was in a state of shock, so she had no choice but to give up resisting. Nicomeda smiled in satisfaction. She glanced at the bottom of the stands. The smoke was starting to fall and slowly dissipate. Coincidentally, the song also stopped at this moment, but there was still applause. The drug did not take effect. The same question appeared in the minds of Caesar and Judas. Judas, who was playing the role of the prince's father, took off his robe, revealing a body of strong muscles that did not match his old face. Of course, the white beard that almost reached his chest was not a prop. He even took out a pair of boxing gloves from his waist and put them on. However, Caesar suddenly reached out and stopped him. Caesar shook his head slightly at Judas and walked down the stage. His gaze changed as he walked, but his eyes never left the applauding young man. At the same time, he said slowly, "Madeira's stun potion, even if only 1 gram of it is diluted, it can make 10 elephants unconscious in an instant. Ordinary people may not be able to resist it. I'm curious. There seems to be some accidents in this performance. The smoke has a name." Luaccio asked curiously. Boss Luo's concept of medicine had always been limited to the commonly used medicines that could be bought in pharmacies. Miss Maid looked at the leading actor who was slowly walking up and said indifferently, "Madeira coma potion, standard amount, 30 grams of ground grass worm corpse powder, 15 grams of 2-ear grass, 10 grams of venomous snake tooth. Rattlesnake tooth is best, 78 grams of mugwort, and 1 standard amount of armadillo bile. In addition, a standard dose of daisy root, fig peel, and leech juice. However, the person who made this potion was lazy and did not use rattlesnake tooth, so the potion was reduced by at least 20%. Caesar, who was walking up the stairs, froze on the first step. He couldn't go down. At the same time, an exclamation came from above the stage. "How did you do it?" "I only used an ordinary snake tooth." A figure jumped down from above the stage. It was a thin and gloomy man with round-rimmed glasses. "This is only the cheapest secret potion. An apprentice should be able to make it. Is it difficult to analyze it?" Miss Maid said indifferently. "You said I'm not even as good as an apprentice?" The skinny man was enraged, but Jodas, who was beside him, grabbed his collar with one hand and pulled. At the same time, he covered the man's mouth. Boss Luo was still rubbing Miss Maid's fingers under his seat, as if praising her profound knowledge. But considering that Miss Maid had her own private laboratory before meeting him, it was understandable. "I didn't expect that there would be a secret pharmacist who left here." Caesar pondered for a moment and asked tentatively, "Madam, are you a member of the Magicians' Association?" He knew that the Magicians' Association had members all over the Eurasian continent, especially the secret pharmacists. Many of them were eccentric people. He had to pay attention to the Magicians' Association. Due to the referendum in Great Britain a few years ago, there was a subtle situation between countries. The Magicians' Association, which had a huge influence in Eurasian continent, made some decisions to resist Great Britain. However, the two sides hadn't reached the point of breaking off relations. After all, there were many certified members of the Magicians' Association in Great Britain. Therefore, it wasn't strange to meet a magician or a secret pharmacist in Great Britain. The strange thing was meeting one here, or maybe two. Caesar's eyes quickly turned from Miss Maid to Luaccio. "Your Excellency, you are?" Caesar stared at him. Luaccio looked around at the people who were just unconscious but not injured. He smiled and said, "If you don't mind, it's best to treat me as an innocent passerby involved in this incident. In fact, I prefer to have a peaceful day." "Peaceful?" Caesar nodded. "I'm sorry. It seems that our actions today have disturbed you. If you want, you can leave." He made a gesture of invitation, pointing to the exit. "Then let's go." Luaccio nodded and stood up. He stretched out his hand gracefully, allowing Miss May to hold his hand and stand up. "There are many performances in the West District today. It shouldn't be boring." Miss May lifted her skirt and put her hand on his. Luaccio looked at Caesar. "Actually, today is my first time to listen to an opera. There are many parts one don't understand. But I like your voice. If there's a chance, I hope to see you perform on the stage." "Your Excellency, what's your name?" "Caphra." Luaccio was stunned. This was the name of the male lead of Tyrandit. He nodded. "Okay, I'll remember it. Then, I hope you can find your princess, Prince Caphra." Caesar's gaze flickered as he watched the couple walk towards the exit along the stairs. Behind him, Jodas quickly ran up, together with the skinny man who was refining the secret medicine. The skinny man said angrily, "Leader, are you going to let them go? They saw us. I'll chase after them." As he spoke, the skinny man looked as if he was about to pass Caesar. Unexpectedly, Caesar suddenly stretched out his hand and lightly slapped behind him. The skinny man's body instantly flew out, all the way until he landed on the stage. He painfully got up and said incredulously, "Leader, are you crazy?" "Caesar?" Judas obviously didn't know why Caesar suddenly hit his men. He frowned. Caesar shook his head. "You can't go up." As for the reason, Caesar took a deep breath, then clenched his fist and punched. His fist seemed to hit something. A loud sound like an explosion was heard. It was so loud that the dust on the ceiling was shaken off. Something was blocking here. Judas looked at it in horror, then tentatively stretched out his hand. An invisible wall stood in front of them, completely separating the theater into two halves. "What kind of power is this?" Judas murmured. He opened Caesar's fist. Bloody fist. He knew that Caesar's punch was not a test, but a real one. At least, there is no malice in his eyes. Caesar was silent for a while. He is a very strange person. At first glance, I felt a kind of kindness. Kindness? Caesar shook his head. Maybe only when you face him, you will understand what happened. At this moment, a woman's voice rang out. At the bottom of the stairs, Caesar could be seen holding Her Majesty hostage and rushing out quickly. As for Lancelot, his hands were shackled, and he was the first to follow behind with an unfriendly expression. The shackles were obviously specially made and were tools specifically used to lock up Transcendence. I heard a loud sound. Caesar, what happened to your hand? Seeing that Caesar's hand was injured, Catherine immediately let go of Her Majesty. Fortunately, the skinny man beside her was shocked and quickly replaced her, but he was still flustered and exasperated. Catherine, do you know what you are doing? Catherine ignored him and quickly walked to Caesar's side, holding his bleeding hand. Without thinking, she unzipped her leather jacket, tore her underwear, and wrapped the wound. Who can hurt you? He did himself. Judas shook his head. What happened just now? How could he tell Catherine? Probably no one would believe him. She was late for half a minute, and everyone might have floated back from the brink of death. Caesar? Catherine frowned. Caesar waved his hand, shook his head slightly, and then walked to Her Majesty the Queen. Standing in front of Her Majesty, Caesar said indifferently, "It's the first time we meet, Your Majesty. Please come with us." Her Majesty the Queen said slowly, "I am just an old woman. Even if you kidnap me, you may not be able to do what you want to do. The ending may not be good." Caesar said, "It's better than no ending." Then he waved his hand. "Sorry to offend you." Judas immediately covered Her Majesty the Queen and Lancelot with a black cloth bag. Caesar looked back at the stage one last time and recalled the mysterious young man's words when he left. Subconsciously, under the stage lights that were still on, he seemed to see a woman singing a solo in the moonlight. Turandot, in order to avoid trouble. When they walked out of the theater, the security guards outside the door and the government security personnel waiting outside the theater were in a state of invisible state. On the street, Luaccio was looking for other theaters, wanted to see if there were any that hadn't started yet. "Master, Lancelot seems to have been taken away. Don't you care?" Miss Servant Girl suddenly asked at this time. Luaccio thought for a while and said, "During the vacation, Black Soul should be isolated from the shop. No matter if they encounter dangerous things or not, they won't get help from the shop. I remember there is such a rule, because this is a part of the life that Black Soul bought." Miss Servant Girl nodded slightly. The 7th rule of the vacation regulations, the 3rd rule. Luaccio stopped and laughed. "Actually, you want to attack the people of the myth of Doomsday?" Hearing this, Miss Servant Girl raised her head and suddenly said, "Master, can I stand on top of the dictionary for 10 days as a punishment and then erase this organization?" Stand on top of the dictionary for 10 days. What kind of punishment is that? Luaccio didn't say anything, but kissed her directly. She also responded, with her hands around Luaccio's waist, hugging gently. "Beautiful lady, are you in a good mood?" When they separated, Boss Luo said softly, "I hope there won't be a third time." In fact, Luaccio felt quite strange. It seemed that he was raised into a useless person by Miss Servant Girl, and then he raised her into a qualified lover. A Miss Servant Girl who could act like a spoiled child was also very good. Genius remembered this site's address in a second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1294. The incident at Her Majesty's Theater was sent to both the government and the night organization at the same time. Both parties were furious at the same time, especially the night organization. They originally thought that they had at least temporarily resolved the danger of the myth of Doomsday, but unexpectedly, the other party took drastic measures and was forcibly taken away from the theater by Her Majesty the Queen. This news was also blocked by the government at once. Currently, the audience in the theater was temporarily placed in the lounge and lobby of the theater, and at the same time, all means of communication were requested to be cut off. The police arrived first, and then the people from the Military Intelligence Department. Finally, Gareth, who had just completed his mission on the Eurostar train track, also brought a team of people to the scene personally. "Who are they?" One of the policemen couldn't help but ask his companions in surprise. Just 10 minutes ago, they had directly made way for the people from the Military Intelligence Department. But now, It was the people from the military intelligence department's turn to make way for this group of people. How would I know? His companion shook his head and looked at the people from the military intelligence department with some disbelief. They seemed to be rather indignant that they were invited by this group of people. The theater where the incident happened was blocked by this group of people. At this time, in the theater, Mr. Gareth stood in the room that the Queen used to watch the show. He had already discovered that there were traces of a fight here, but after the wood was cut, the traces of a fight in the room were not heavy. The fight didn't seem to have lasted very long. Or was it one-sided? But the one guarding the Queen was Lancelot. Who could easily suppress Lancelot? Gareth was more and more puzzled. Even if she had been injured by Farrell last night, Lancelot shouldn't have been unable to fight back in England. He and the clown, Dagonite, were actually less injured than Lancelot. His and the clown's holy armor was broken by Farrell before it could be deployed, so the holy armor wasn't too damaged. But Lancelot was forcibly destroyed by Farrell after putting on the holy armor. At this time, a knight called from below the stage. He seemed to have discovered something. Mr. Gareth simply jumped down from the stands. He saw the knight come over with a middle-aged man. Mr. Snake. Gareth greeted the middle-aged man politely. He was a magician hired by the Knight organization. Although he was also a member of the Magician Association, he had been a Briton for generations. After he was certified by the Magician Association, he had always stayed in Britain. Mr. Gareth. Mr. Snakel nodded. I found some remnants of the secret medicine at the scene. I've also tested the samples collected from the audience. It's the same substance. This is a kind of poison that causes people to faint instantly, but it's harmless. Secret apothecary. Gareth frowned. According to the information we have, there is indeed a senior cadre who is a secret apothecary in the myth of Doomsday. What's his name again? Tipu, Mr. Snakel said calmly. Also, he's actually not a secret apothecary, because he was suspected of cheating and poisoning the examiner during the secret apothecary certification process. The Magicians Association has permanently stripped him of his qualification as a certified secret apothecary. At this time, another knight walked over quickly. Mr. Gareth, we've investigated everything. Other than the disappearance of the Queen and Lady Lancelot, there are only 2 actors from the troupe. Actors? Gareth frowned. The knight said, one of them is called Caesar, the actor who played the male lead. The other one is called Judas, also an important character in the drama, Caesar. Gareth said the name subconsciously. Sir, have you thought of anything? Gareth shook his head. No, I don't have a clue. All right, Mr. Snakel, can we use tracking magic? No. Mr. Snakel shook his head. I didn't find any useful medium here. I can't use tracking magic. Sorry. Don't mind it. Gareth patted his shoulder, but he was at a loss. At this time, the phone rang. It was a call from the Knights organization. Gareth picked up the call immediately. Then his expression changed slightly. Really? What? 1 day's time, before dawn tomorrow. Number 10 Downing Street. He was so angry that he suppressed the urge to smash the phone. Hopkins, I hope you're just playing a bad joke on me. I think I also want to be in the mood to play such a bad joke on you. But it's not like that. Prime Minister. Mr. Hopkins's voice sounded somewhat helpless. Just a quarter of an hour ago, the Knight Agency received a notice from the leader of Myth of Doomsday. The content was as follows. First, release all members of Myth of Doomsday unconditionally. Second, pass the request for the cession of Northern Ireland before sunrise tomorrow. If not, at sunrise tomorrow, they will publicly execute Her Majesty the Queen. What a joke. Can't the entire British Empire deal with a few thugs? The Prime Minister roared. Mr. Hopkins, I really want to know if the annual funds allocated to the Knight Agency for so many years have been spent on King pigs. In the Knight Agency, Mr. Hopkins took the phone away from his ear. He was annoyed, so he was not in the mood to listen to the man in number 10 Downing Street roaring. The Prime Minister was only worried about Her Majesty the Queen being threatened, but Mr. Hopkins was also worried about Farrell's prison break. I won't trust you anymore, Hopkins, he suddenly said coldly and hung up the phone. Mr. Hopkins couldn't help but have an ominous feeling. He silently looked at the pendulum clock on the wall. There were only about 14 hours until sunrise tomorrow. He sighed, stood up, and turned around. The hanging pictures on the wall behind him automatically moved away, revealing a huge screen. The screen turned on, and on the screen, 7 faces appeared at the same time. These were the people in charge of the night agency. Everyone, the situation is already like this. We need to know the Queen's whereabouts immediately. If we allow the enemy to publicly execute Her Majesty this time, it will be the most terrifying and ridiculous joke in the history of our country. Speak. Hopkins, what is your decision? Mr. Hopkins took a deep breath and said seriously, activate the Holy Grail. On the screen, everyone instantly fell silent. A strange aura, even through the screen, seemed to slowly fill the air due to the conversation between the 8 people at the head of the meeting. Finally, on the screen, an old man slowly said, Hopkins, you should know that the Holy Grail is a trophy seized from the war 100 years ago, but it is forbidden to be used. Using the Holy Grail requires a sacrifice, don't you know? Tomorrow, we may see a country in chaos. Mr. Hopkins sighed, so I, Hopkins Pendragon, the descendant of the great King Arthur, will use the absolute command once and ask the night agency to obey one of my orders. Hopkins, are you serious? Everyone on the screen was shocked. Hopkins, the absolute command is an honor bestowed by the night agency to the descendant of King Arthur. You can only use it twice in your life. Mr. Hopkins didn't speak, but slowly unscrewed the silver carving on his wristband. After unscrewing the silver carving, there was a mechanism inside. From a small gap below the carving, a gem slipped out. Mr. Hopkins held this gem high. The people in charge of the night agency on the screen all stood up at this time. Yes, I have decided, Mr. Hopkins slowly said. With this as the proof of the royal power, I will use the absolute command once. Yes, Your Majesty. This was probably a place similar to a prison, and it was made of stone, which seemed to be quite old. Her Majesty didn't know where she was finally sent to. When she opened the black cloth bag, she was already in this place. At the same time, Lancelot was also locked in this place. I'm sorry, I didn't do my job well. Lancelot slightly lowered her head. I let you be in such a vicious environment. Her Majesty didn't panic as Lancelot imagined, but looked around the stone room. The only light was an oil lamp put down by the hijackers. This was a stone room about the size of a bungalow. In fact, it's already very good. At least there's a place to sit. But they took away my pet, which I can't accept. Her Majesty smiled and sat down. The chair was made of wood, so it was obviously not very comfortable. Lancelot frowned. The Queen's calmness was out of her expectation. Your Majesty, aren't you afraid? Her Majesty smiled. I'm afraid, but I'm afraid of the future, not the current prison. You're a great person, Lancelot suddenly said after a moment of silence. Her Majesty slightly shook her head. She could still bear this kind of suffering. Back in the day, she had been locked in a place even narrower than this stone room. Not only was she hungry and cold, but there was also no light. For 3 days and 3 nights, she was almost going crazy under the punishment of that respectable yet terrifying tutor. Compared to the punishment she received when she was young, because she couldn't meet the tutor's requirements, this stone room was really nothing. On the snowy grassland, she stood barefoot with a thick dictionary, maintaining a lady's posture. She was forced to master French within a month, and almost half of her time was spent on transcribing, and she still had to maintain a gentle smile. It was really nothing, this sure city. But you, Lancelot, are you afraid? Her Majesty came back from her memories, looking at this young woman, and asked softly. Lancelot directly shook her head. To become a knight, the first thing to do is to overcome the fear brought by danger. Oh, the Queen shook her head. Child, listen to me. Right now, you're just like me. We are both in prison here, ordinary people who have lost their powers. I am not the Queen here, and you can't use any power here. It's not shameful to admit your fear. Lancelot was startled, and then frowned. I'm worried about what they're going to do next. You've been kidnapped. Once this matter is exposed, the outside world will inevitably fall into panic. Her Majesty suddenly interrupted Lancelot. Lancelot, when did you become a knight? Me? She opened her mouth. This queen didn't seem to be worried about her situation at all. Her Majesty folded her hands on her thighs. At this time, her sitting posture was still elegant, as if she was sitting on a noble throne instead of an inferior wooden stool. We can't change our current situation for the time being. Her Majesty chuckled. Generally speaking, at this time, what we need to do is to change our bad mood. Chatting is obviously a very good way. My female knight. I want to check the environment here. She obviously couldn't agree, and after a quick reply, she began to check the walls of the stone room. Inch by inch, she tapped it with her fingers. Her Majesty looked at it, gently shook her head, and then slowly closed her eyes. Did they agree? In the room, the skinny man with glasses. Tipu quickly stood up, because at this time, Judas had just come back from outside. And Judas's mission was to send the notice of the leader to the night mechanism. Judas looked at Tipu angrily, rolled his eyes, and said, I'm threatening you to die now. Do you want to think about it? Shaking his head, Judas ignored Thep, who he had just insulted, and quickly walked to the side of Caesar, the leader. I've received news from Dobuz that the people in charge of the 7 major night organizations from all over the country are rushing to the Fog City at almost the same time. The Knights of the Round Table who are currently in charge will probably gather in an hour. Isn't this to be expected? The one who spoke was Catherine, who was treating Caesar's wound. She didn't know what was wrong with the wound. Although the bleeding had stopped, it still couldn't heal. This was very incredible. Whether it was Catherine or Judas, they were very clear about how strong Caesar's body was. That's it, Catherine. At this time, Caesar withdrew his hand from Catherine's hand. As long as it doesn't bleed, this wound won't be a problem. He stood up and began to put on his coat at the same time, and asked, Dobuz, haven't you found the news of the Soul Witch? That bitch. Catherine snorted coldly. Since the accident, she hasn't appeared. She is not on our side. Caesar shook his head and said casually, if we are not on the same side, most of the myth of Doomsday is not on our side. They're just free members. Since we can't find her, then forget it. What we need to do is to wait for tomorrow's sunrise. They won't find this place, don't worry. Judas nodded. As long as they can't find this place before dawn. Genius remembered the address of this station in a second. Mobile version reading website. Chapter 1295. Lancelot had already knocked on every inch of the stone room's wall, but she still could not find anything that could help her escape. Lancelot sighed silently, then glanced at the queen, who was resting with her eyes closed. Could it be that there was nothing else she could do other than maintain her physical strength? She looked at the shackles on her body, helplessly. This was a tool that could imprison power. Even so, the shackles could not suppress the power inside the holy armor. Calculating the time, the self-repair of the holy armor should be completed soon. The key was how to break the shackles on her hands. Also, how to deal with the holy armor on Catherine Nicomeda, Guinevere's repentance. Lancelot du Lake, the first generation of the Knights of the Round Table, once fell in love with King Arthur's queen, Guinevere. In the end, it led to a tragic ending of love is a ray of light. The result was that King Arthur died in the Battle of the Sword Fence, and the queen entered the monastery to repent. As for the first generation of Lancelot, she did not see her lover again until she died. Legend had it that the holy armor, Guinevere's repentance, had the ability to completely restrain the holy armor of Lancelot du Lake and the indestructible light of the lake. It only had this one special ability, and other than that, it could not even compare to the golden armor of the Grand Knights. It was not that the person who made the holy armor deliberately added such an ability, but it was just a vow that the first generation of Lancelot made to her own sword before she died. Never hurt Guinevere. Later, it evolved into a situation where the indestructible light of the lake could not attack the holy armor, Guinevere's repentance, which was the so-called complete restraint. But the holy armor also disappeared with Guinevere's death in the monastery. Although the descendants of the knights of the past have been trying to find the whereabouts of this legendary holy armor, they had not found a single clue until now. Why would it appear in the hands of the myth of Doomsday? This question had been lingering in Lancelot's mind. She had a high compatibility with Lancelot du Lake, and she was the one who could exert the most power of the holy armor among all the knights of the Round Table. But apart from that, her physical ability was far inferior to that of the clown, and her swordsmanship was also incomparable to Gareth's. Each of the 12 Round Tables had their own specialties, but she was the only one who was mediocre in every aspect. Did you have a good rest, ladies? Just as she was deep in thought, a voice suddenly came from outside the stone room. As the stone door opened, the light suddenly increased, and 3 figures appeared at the door at the same time. One of them was the wielder of the holy suit, Catherine. As for the other 2, they were Caesar and Judas. The queen, who was resting on the stool with her eyes closed, slowly opened her eyes. At this time, Catherine and Judas walked in at the same time and directly came in front of Lancelot. Her body's power had been restrained, and she could not summon the power of the holy armor, not to mention Catherine, who was completely restrained, so now she could only helplessly give up resistance. Very obedient, Catherine chuckled. I thought you would conjure up another rose. Faced with such ridicule, Lancelot wanted to dig a hole and bury herself. She just pretended not to hear and frowned. You kidnapped the queen. What do you want to do? No one answered her question, and Caesar just waved his hand, and Catherine and Judas took Lancelot out of the stone room at the same time. Before leaving, Caesar glanced at Lancelot and said indifferently, We will meet again later. After the 2 escorted Lancelot away, Caesar walked slowly to the queen. He took out a pocket watch from his clothes and looked at the time. It is now 7:13 in the evening, Your Majesty. I am sorry to have made you spend 2 hours and 7 minutes in such a bad environment. The queen smiled and said, So, don't you want to use dinner to make up for your apology? Sorry, if it's food, someone will send it later. Caesar was slightly surprised. This queen seemed to be a little different from the rumors outside. The queen sat up straight. My physical strength is not as good as before, so I kidnapped you, sir. Please allow me to sit and talk to you. It's okay. I will leave soon. Caesar nodded. The queen smiled and said, I think it's about time you came to see me. Are you going to tell me the intention behind this kidnapping and how to deal with me? Caesar didn't say anything, but just walked around the queen slowly, and then calmly told her his request to the Knight Organization and the British government. When she heard that she would be publicly executed, Her Majesty frowned imperceptibly, but she covered it up very well, as if she was mocking herself. It seems that in addition to the title of the longest reigning queen, I have to add one more title. The first queen to be publicly executed in modern times? I have so many titles that there is no place to engrave them on my tombstone. I am curious. You don't seem to be afraid at all. Caesar looked at her and said, Is it the message from the government, or the certainty of the Knight Organization that you will be rescued? The queen laughed and said, I'm already at this age in the next few years. No matter what day I am suddenly taken away from this world, it is not necessarily strange. Can I ask you a question? Go ahead. Caesar nodded. You have this right, Your Majesty. The queen looked up. Why do you want to become independent of Northern Ireland? Because we need a country, Caesar said calmly. What do you need a country for? The queen continued to ask. Survival. Without the soil for you to survive. In that soil, there are people who enslave, capture, cruelly kill, oppress, and humiliate us. So you use such a radical method? So you use such a last resort? If you really become independent, what do you plan to do next? We will send an invitation to all our kind in the world. They can live freely in this country. Maybe there will be war next. We have seen too much blood. We are not afraid of war. Sir, do you have children? Yes. Is it also for your children? Yes. I hope you can succeed. I will. It was still a prison cell made of stone, but this was not a simple prison cell. It was a place where a large number of torture instruments were placed. Right here, Lancelot's hands were locked and hung from the ceiling with an iron chain. She was almost standing on her toes. Catherine was looking at her with a playful expression. Have you never thought that, as a noble knight of the Round Table, you would be treated like this one day? Catherine pinched Lancelot's chin and asked with a smile, Are you going to torture me? Lancelot said coldly, Why would I torture you? Catherine suddenly narrowed her eyes. Compared to torture, Isn't it better to do something more interesting to you?" As she said, just as Lancelot was surprised, Catherine directly kissed her lips. Lancelot's cheeks were pinched, so she could only open her mouth and let the other's tongue freely invade her mouth. The moment the female knight was violated, she was almost in a state of shock. When the soft thing rolled around in her body, the moment the touch began to spread from the cerebral cortex like a slight paralysis, she remembered that she should resist. However, at the moment when she was angry and wanted to bite off the other's tongue, Catherine had already let go of the intersection. The sparkling and translucent crystal thread began to stretch between the two of them before finally breaking apart. Miss Catherine laughed jokingly. "What a childish kissing technique. I have seen your profile. You're 25 years old. Haven't you experienced a man? Do you want to be like the Holy Maiden and always be pure? What did you feed me?" Lancelot only felt something sliding down her throat. This was something that was forcibly put into her mouth when the other party violated her. A kind of parasitic imprint worm. This is a filthy thing that a magician family in East Asia has studied for nearly half a century. As for its function, you will know soon. As Lancelot was saying, Catherine violently tore her collar. The white shirt collar was torn to the chest, and the buttons fell to the ground. Her white shirt was finally completely torn apart, revealing her body with only underwear. Her towering breasts and her well-trained lower abdomen with clear abdominal contours. Catherine's finger pointed at Lancelot's throat and slowly slid down from there. "I heard that even those who inherit the Knights of the Round Table are not able to fully utilize the power of the inheritance. Generally, they can only reach the initial fusion stage, which is unable to fully fuse with the holy armor. They need to wear at least a part of the holy armor on their body to be able to activate its power. Only those who reach the second stage can achieve the level of fusion. At this time, the holy armor and the knight's body have already merged into one and will not fall off unless they die." Her finger finally stopped at Lancelot's abdomen. At this moment, Lancelot suddenly felt an intense cramping pain coming from her abdomen. This degree of pain even made her break out in a cold sweat in an instant. Her breathing was rapid. She really wanted to cry out in pain. "Looks like it is starting to take effect." Catherine narrowed her eyes at this time. The holy seal of the 12 Round Table, Lancelot du Lac. A golden seal slowly appeared on Lancelot's abdomen at this time. This is your plan?" Lancelot endured the pain. "To deprive me of my power. This is just the beginning." Catherine smiled. She did not take any further action against Lancelot, but slowly stepped back until she reached the door. When the door of the stone room opened, outside the door, Caesar came. Caesar glanced at the situation in the stone room and asked directly, "Are you ready?" Catherine wrapped her arms around Caesar's neck and leaned her body against his. She blinked and said, "How are you going to reward me? Are you going to marry me?" Caesar asked suddenly. "What?" Catherine was suddenly startled. At the moment when she was distracted, Caesar released her hand and walked directly to Lancelot. Catherine's face flashed with ecstasy at this time, and then she followed him. The effect of the seal worm is very good. It seems that this Japanese magician family is really capable. The holy seal will be temporarily peeled off from her body soon. Feeling this man's gaze on her, Lancelot could not help but shudder. This man's eyes seemed to be desolate. You are their leader?" Lancelot asked weakly. Every second of the holy seal peeling off was extremely painful. "My name is Caesar," Caesar said slowly, "but in your information, there may only be the name Oberon." "Caesar?" Lancelot frowned. Catherine smiled and said, "To be precise, Caesar, the descendant of the elf king, Oberon, born by Julius Caesar and the legendary witch Morgan Le Fay." "Legendary witch Morgan?" Lancelot's face showed a trace of horror. "Could it be, just as you think, it is the man that your knight organization first called the king, the half-sister witch Morgan? So strictly speaking, he also has part of King Arthur's bloodline." At the same time, Catherine took off Caesar's coat. "Ow!" Lancelot was shocked. Catherine sneered. "Now you know why we want to take the holy seal from you, right?" At this time, Caesar directly stretched out his hand and pressed on Lancelot's abdomen. The power of Lancelot Lake is temporarily mine. The pain when the holy seal began to peel off was 10 times more intense than when the imprint bug took effect. The pain finally broke her nerves and defeated her endurance. The fear of the holy seal being taken away finally made her let out a shrill cry. For a whole half an hour, this kind of scream continued in the stone room. When the holy seal representing the power of Lancelot du Lake appeared on the back of Caesar's hand, Lancelot was almost in a state of collapse. Her body was naturally hanging down, and because of the pain, saliva began to flow from her lips. Caesar looked at the hand with the holy seal and then gently clenched his fist. A gray light instantly enveloped his whole body. The dark gray armor vaguely emitted a dark purple glimmer. When the indestructible lake light also appeared in Caesar's hand at the same time, Lancelot finally lost consciousness and fainted. Ignoring Lancelot's situation at this time, Catherine looked at Caesar with concern and asked eagerly, "How is it?" The third stage of unification is still a bit difficult, but it's almost enough. Caesar dispersed the holy armor on his body and put on his coat again. He glanced at the unconscious Lancelot and said indifferently, "Send her back to Her Majesty, and also send some food. You are still too kind." Catherine shook her head. Fog City, night mechanism. Sir Puskins Manor. On the lawn of the manor, the strong wind bent the grass, and the sound of the spirals spinning was very loud. A helicopter was slowly descending at this time. At the same time, in the sky, there were several other helicopters that were planning to descend. An old man, supported by 2 attendants, slowly walked over from the helicopter. At this time, Knight Gareth, who had been waiting here for a long time, quickly came forward and greeted this old man. This old man was the person in charge of the Birmingham night mechanism. At the same time, there was a bearded man behind the old man. Gareth also greeted, "Tristan, I haven't seen you for a few months. Your beard is still so beautiful." "Don't give me that." The bearded man glared at Tristan, who was also one of the 12 knights. In his hand, he was carrying a black box. The box was even connected to Tristan's wrist with handcuffs. Looking at the box, Gareth slightly narrowed his eyes. He then looked at the other helicopters that were preparing to descend. The people in charge of the other night mechanisms were sitting on them. At the same time, they were also responsible for transporting the other keys. Only by gathering the keys of the various night mechanisms could the secret room where the Holy Grail was placed be opened. Genius remembered this site's address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1296. At 8 in the evening, the first car quickly drove into the suburbs. In a large field of farmland, the bulletproof car stopped in front of a hill. The flat ground suddenly began to rise, revealing a huge steel plate covered with mud and grass. The steel plate was slanted, and this became a special entrance. The bulletproof car drove in. Not far ahead, there was a stone mountain. After entering the ground, there were lights and a straight asphalt road. After walking for about 200 meters, there was a huge gate. When the gate opened, what could be seen was a huge dock built into the mountain. There was only one 30-meter-long small plane here. It looked like a fighter jet. The whole dock seemed to be dedicated to this special fighter jet. More than 10 maintenance workers wearing gray uniforms and hats were working on this huge fighter jet. The bulletproof car finally stopped at an entrance on the side. The Prime Minister hurriedly got out of the car, and someone came to greet him. Mr. Prime Minister just nodded, and then his face slightly darkened, and he quickly walked into the entrance. The person who came to greet him was wearing a star military uniform. In terms of military rank, he was obviously not low. "Are you ready?" The Prime Minister's footsteps became faster and faster. The officer next to him quickly followed and said quickly, "After receiving your call 30 minutes ago, we started preparing, but we are still in the adjustment stage. It is estimated that we will need another hour to reach the best value." "1 hour is too long. Try to shorten it." The Prime Minister frowned. The people who kidnapped the Queen this time are non-human creatures. Those old guys from the night mechanism actually watched the Queen be kidnapped and taken away. That old bastard Hopkins even told me that he didn't estimate it. These guys are still unreliable. We can only rely on ourselves. While speaking, he and the officer had already taken the elevator and finally arrived at a control room. From here, they could see everything in the dock. All the people in the control room stood up at the same time and saluted the Prime Minister. "Let's get to work." The Prime Minister waved his hand, then took off his coat and pinched up his sleeves. At the same time, he took the earphones from his staff. "Set the screen to the adjustment room. Let me see the status of these warriors." "Yes." On the console of the front screen, a woman wearing a military uniform quickly typed. Soon, a set of images appeared on the screen. The scene of the so-called adjustment room. There were a total of 20 machines that looked like huge game cabins and CT scanning machines. They were neatly placed in a huge and empty room. On each of these machines, there were people wearing tight-fitting combat suits. Some were men, some were women. They were all very young, around the age of 20. How beautiful. The Prime Minister looked at everything on the screen. This is our own strength. It's time to show this strength in front of those arrogant knights. Mr. Prime Minister, even if the soldiers in the army are adjusted, we still don't know where the Queen is hiding. Although he had great confidence in everything in this base, this officer had to consider some inhuman factors at this time. "Don't worry, I can find the Queen's location," Mr. Prime Minister said confidently. "All right, as long as this crisis is resolved, then in the future, the matters of the inhuman domain will no longer be exclusive to the Knight mechanism. Ancient glory? This group of stubborn old fogies who have been controlling us. It's time to consider retirement." As he spoke, the Prime Minister took out a black box about the size of a cigarette box. He looked at the officer and said, "Use this to track the source of the signal. It can help us lock onto the correct location." "This is..." The officer was slightly startled, as if he thought of something. Could it be that the Prime Minister had been secretly tracking the Queen's movements and installed a tracker on her? "It's not her." The Prime Minister waved his hand. "Don't think too much, do as I say. I don't care if it's the end of the world or the myth of tomorrow. Before tomorrow's sunrise, I want this group of thugs to never see the dawn again." The officer stood at attention and saluted. Very good, good boy. Look at your hair. This Queen must have taken good care of you." In the room, Judas, who had a long beard but a strong physical body, was currently hugging and playing with the small animal that could be described as insignificant to him. This was the Queen's pet. Only Tipu, who was an abandoned disciple of the esoteric pharmacist, was accompanying him. This skinny man with glasses stared gloomily at the small animal that was acting spoiled in Judas's arms, as if it was not a stranger at all. He frowned. "Judas, when did you become so caring?" He just glanced at Tipu and said casually, "I'm actually the same as you." "The same as me?" Tipu was stunned. Judas looked at Tipu, who was sitting in front of the table and arranging various bottles and jars, as well as various props. "You esoterics need to prepare so many props for a battle. You can't be careless every time, right?" "Yes, this is common sense." Tipu nodded. Judas said calmly, "I'm different. I only use my fist to fight, so it's enough to keep my mind calm. This way I can calm down." "Isn't it because you're essentially a cat-stroking and poop-scooping officer?" Tipu complained. "You should at least take out your gloves and wipe them so that I can feel that you're actually preparing for battle. Why are you so nervous?" Judas shook his head instead. "Although tomorrow is very important, it's not like we haven't experienced life and death before. Is it because of that female esoteric pharmacist in the theater?" There was a reason why Tipu was so angry that he did not hesitate to show up. This was related to his past experience. During the esoteric pharmacist certification exam of the Magician Association, he was framed by his opponent for cheating and even accidentally injured the examiner. In the end, he was stripped of his permanent qualification to become an esoteric pharmacist. In the theater, the female esoteric pharmacist casually said that he did not even want to become an esoteric pharmacist apprentice. This naturally provoked a thorn in Tipu's heart, and he could not endure it. "Humph!" Tipu frowned slightly. "If she dares to show up again, I'll definitely let her try the power of my 10 secret potions. I advise you not to complicate matters. Judas shook his head. From the situation in the theater, that couple should not be interested in our matters. Tipu, the world is very big. Although the leader is very strong, there are definitely people more powerful than him. That invisible barrier, did you see it? Even the leader's full-strength punch couldn't break it, and he injured himself instead. Perhaps he only has the power to defend, but he's only a weakling. Tipu snorted coldly. There's so many defensive items. Doesn't the Magician Association have the Burning Seven Circles, which is known as absolute defense? In addition, I heard that the 13 vampire clans also have secret treasures. They pass on the blood glory used by the vampire ancestor Cain, which is also known as a divine artifact that cannot be broken by physical attacks. Judas smiled bitterly. Please, the things you mentioned are either legendary artifacts or priceless treasures. If it's so easy for us to find one, then I should have considered buying a lottery ticket before sunrise. Maybe I could have won the prize. That way, even if I fail tomorrow, I should still be able to enjoy my old age. Useless old thing. Brat. In fact, Tipu was not very old. Although he looked middle-aged, his body had been corroded by a lot of toxins due to long-term contact with secret potions, so he looked much older than normal. In fact, Tipu was only 17 years old this year. He was once known as the most talented genius in the last 100 years in the magician world. Yes, he was only 17 years old this year. Bickering was probably a way to relax. Suddenly, the sound of a harmonica was heard outside the house. Outside, under a tree, Caesar was sitting on the grass, playing the harmonica, and Catherine was leaning on him, looking at the moonlight and the clouds in the night. When Lancelot woke up, her lips were wet. When she woke up, she found herself lying on the ground with a coat under her. It was the one Her Majesty was wearing. At this time, the queen was using a wet handkerchief to moisten her lips. She even rested on the queen's lap. "Queen, how can I let you?" Lancelot struggled to sit up. The queen pressed her body and blinked. "Look, child, you're not even as strong as an old woman. Why are you still trying to be brave?" "But—" Lancelot opened her mouth. The queen smiled and said, "When I was young, I participated in the war. Although it was just a support group for women, I still have some experience in taking care of the injured. Although I haven't done it for many years, I'm still a bit rusty. Your right hand seems to be seriously fractured. Was it caused by them? I can only help you fix it. After all, the conditions here are limited." Lancelot struggled to raise her arm. There were 2 pieces of wood wrapped around her arm with cloth. Apparently, the wood was taken from the wooden chair. "No." Lancelot shook her head. The fracture of her right hand happened earlier. 1 day ago, her right hand was holding the light of the indestructible lake. It took a direct hit from the legendary, most powerful knight, Farlier. Not only did the sword break, but the power of the shock also broke her hand. Thinking of the light of the indestructible lake, she thought of the matter of being deprived of the power of inheritance. Her eyes couldn't help but dim. "It seems—" The queen lowered her head and looked at her, whispering, "You guys are really working hard in places I can't see. I lost the power of a night." At this moment, the queen covered her eyes with her palm and said slowly, "Right now, the darkness you see is only temporary. When I let go of my palm, the light will appear before your eyes again. But I don't want it to appear immediately. Do you know why?" "Why?" she asked subconsciously. The queen said, "Because the darkness can calm you down. You can't see your weakness. So, you can cry as much as you want. But when the light appears, you need to be ready." "Child." Lancelot didn't say anything. Merely, the queen was able to feel the wetness from her palm. At this time, the sound of a musical instrument came from outside the stone room. It was the sound of a harmonica. The queen recognized it. Her left hand was still covering Lancelot's eyes, but at this time, her right hand was holding something, a black card. This was the card that the queen gave to her when she met the respected and terrible teacher in the theater. "Little Elizabeth, if you encounter something you can't solve, make a wish to this card, and your teacher will appear. But correspondingly, you have to pay something precious." "Teacher," The queen was lost in thought. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening when they came out of another theater. They didn't see the complete Turandot for more than 10 minutes, but the club owner and the maid duo successfully watched the famous Phantom of the Opera. The weather in this month was still very cold in the streets of Fog City. Many passers-by were wrapped in clothes, walking in the wind. Of course, for the club owner and the maid, it didn't feel the cold. It was indeed elegant. Miss Maid's dress today, but didn't it look a bit thin? Master! Suddenly, Miss Maid felt the cold. It was the kind of cold that she personally experienced. She couldn't remember the last time she felt this way when she was weak. The only person in the world who could cause her body to become like this without being aware of anything was probably her master. I suddenly found that the stronger I am, the more interesting things I can't feel. Luaccio just smiled, then held Miss Maid's hands, put them to his lips, and blew hot air on them. He gently rubbed them to bring heat. For example, like this. Luaccio smiled. Do you think I'm too bad? You can be worse to me. Luaccio smiled without saying anything. He took off his coat and put it on Miss Maid. Although it was a bit loose, there were many similar situations on the street. Those lovers who were in love were probably like this. The street was very lively. Miss Maid, wearing her master's coat, leaned on Luaccio, holding her handbag, and walked silently with her head down. Then they stopped before the performance of the street artists. It was a street band. The reason why Boss Luo stopped was that he saw a former customer. It's Mr. Chung. Did he come here to study music? Miss Maid looked at him with slight surprise. It was an Oriental young man who was holding a guitar, playing and singing. He was playing and singing in the crowd. Wearing a cap, he played and sang a song called Remember Me. Luaccio smiled at this time. He has his own thing. Chapter 1297. The street performance didn't last long. Soon, the crowd dispersed, and it was 9 o'clock in the evening. Chung Iran began to pack up the tools around him. He was not the only one performing. There were also several new friends he met in the rock bar by chance after coming to Fog City. Thank you so much, Will, for being willing to accompany me. Chung Iran came to Will, who was packing up the amplifier. You're welcome. Anyway, I have nothing to do at night. Will smiled. Did the police come to you today? Chung Iran asked casually. Last night, because of Will's call, he called the police, and the police went to the social work center later. After that, he made a recording at the scene and submitted some identity information, and then returned to the dormitory of the music academy. No. Will shook his head, a little puzzled. Those guys didn't come again. It's strange. Later, I called the police and asked. They didn't seem to care about their own affairs and even had a perfunctory attitude. What about those guys who arrested you? Will still shook his head. They haven't appeared yet. I see. Chung Iran nodded. You'd better be careful. Where are you going next? Do you want to go to the music bar for a while? Call them? Chung Iran looked at Will's companion, who was also a member of Will's punk band and his colleague in the social work center. No, I have to go back to the center later. It was a bit messy last night, and some places haven't been cleaned up yet. Then I'll go and help. Chung Iran smiled. Take it as a thank you for accompanying me tonight? Oh, that's great. Chung, can you cook some fried noodles for me while you're at it? I really love your Chinese food. The companion next to him hurriedly shouted happily. Will shook his head helplessly and then looked at the guitar bag Chung Iran was carrying. He had been carrying this guitar bag with him all the time, even when he came to the social work center after calling the police last night. Chung Iran had been carrying a guitar all the time. In fact, Chung Iran had never taken it out to play. Will was even sometimes curious whether the guitar in the guitar bag was a guitar. In today's street performance, Chung Iran carried it with him, and, at the same time, he carried an extra one for the performance. Will once curiously asked Chung Iran about the guitar that he never took it out. He just smiled and said that he wasn't ready yet. He didn't have enough weight to pick it up. What was the preparation to pick up a guitar? Of course, Will didn't understand, but without a doubt, he was a person who respected the privacy of others, so he was only curious and didn't ask further. Speaking of which, aren't there a little too many police cars tonight? Chung Iran watched a police car roar past. In his memory, there were about 3 police cars passing by in the last 15 minutes. Speaking of which, it seems so. Will was stunned. Suddenly, A child walked to Chung Iran's side and gave him an envelope, saying that someone asked him to deliver it. Chung Iran was secretly curious. He opened the envelope and saw that it was a card. "You can fly." There was no signature, just a few words of encouragement. The 3 words on the card seemed so monotonous. He couldn't help but be startled. "What's wrong, Chung?" Will asked curiously. "Who sent it to you?" Chung Iran will take a look, then shook his head and said, "Probably a good person who encourages others." Denial, slander, cursing, there were all kinds of things. There were very few people who were willing to encourage a stranger. Receiving a card of encouragement from a stranger made Chung Iran happier than when he attracted a lot of people during the performance. Even under Will's curious gaze, Chung Iran opened the zipper of the guitar bag that he never took out in front of him for the first time and put in the card of encouragement. They talked and laughed and soon came to the door of the social work center. Here Will saw a guy who surprised him. He was wearing a black jacket and was leaning against a motorcycle, looking around. "Mr. Klein?" Will was very curious as to why this motorcycle rider would visit. And from the looks of it, he seemed to have been waiting for quite some time. The person waiting outside the social work center was indeed Knight Klein, who was ordered to rest in the Knight organization. "I happen to be free today. I thought of the child yesterday and was a little worried, so I wanted to come and see." Klein quickly explained his reason. That was the truth. Because of his superior, Mr. Garrett's order, Klein was unable to participate in any action of the Knight organization. But he was a person who couldn't stay idle. He couldn't just put on a red and blue mesh tights and transform into a superhero in a movie to fight crime. As a Knight, he had always disdained to deceive others. "I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Will couldn't help but sigh. "What happened?" Klein frowned. His intuition told him that something had happened. Actually, a pair of siblings? And wearing a black windbreaker. After listening to Will's description, Klein seemed to have thought of something subconsciously, but he didn't confirm it. "Will, can you tell me in detail the specific characteristics of those guys? How should I say? It feels like a gang, but it doesn't really look like one. Because I remember they said that after the matter was done, they wouldn't appear in front of me again. I also feel strange." Will even said that the attitude of the police was perfunctory. This made Klein even more convinced that Will might have met a member of the Knight organization last night. But why did they want to catch a child? Siblings. Could it be one of the orcs who went missing at the dock yesterday? Klein couldn't help but feel annoyed when he thought that he might have missed an orc who went missing in the incident. Sure enough, he was still too young. "Hey, you guys stop chatting," Will's colleague suddenly asked. "Well, besides us, who else is going to be on duty tonight? Why is the light inside on?" In fact, it was only one of the rooms in the center that was lit up. Just as everyone subconsciously looked at it, the door of the room suddenly closed. Vaguely, they seemed to see a figure hurriedly flashing by. Could it be the people who caused the destruction last night? Chung Iran said subconsciously. "This will open his mouth. I'll go take a look." Surprisingly, Klein said quickly, and without waiting for anyone's reaction, he directly jumped up the wall next to the door. Yes, he jumped up. It was similar to the climbing of parkour, but it was obviously more relaxed. "Cool." His colleague was amazed. Will could only hurriedly open the door. "This motorcycle rider, is there something wrong with his brain?" In the dark corridor, Klein tried his best to soften his footsteps, and at the same time, he tried his best to listen to all the sounds. He really did feel that someone was hiding here. "Come out. I already know where you are. There is no need to hide." He tried to make a sound to make the other party nervous. However, Klein didn't notice that there was a pair of amber eyes looking at him from the beam of the dark corridor. Suddenly, the owner of the amber-colored eyes pounced on the young knight from behind. Klein felt the approaching danger, and at the critical moment, he turned around and crossed his hands in front of his body. He only felt a huge force hit him, and he had no choice but to quickly retreat. In the corridor, he only saw a blurry black shadow, which was constantly jumping. Klein was secretly shocked. This time he really met an inhuman. His arm bones were faintly aching. He was injured by the group of demons yesterday and hadn't recovered yet. But at this time, he didn't have time to report to the Knight mechanism and ask for backup. He could only face the danger head-on. Klein quickly adjusted his breathing and concentrated on observing the movements of the agile black shadow. But at this time, a bang sounded. The corridor was instantly lit up as if it was daytime. The first thing Klein saw was a girl who was currently raising her arm high. But the moment the light was turned on, the girl's arm suddenly stopped. "What are you doing?" When the light was turned on, the girl stopped her attack, and Will's puzzled voice was heard. The next moment, the girl quickly retreated all the way to Will's front. Klein was about to shout for her to be careful, but he was stunned by the girl's next move. He saw that the girl didn't want to attack Will. Instead, she stood in front of Will and looked at him with a fierce and vigilant expression. Rather than saying that she wanted to hurt Will, it was more accurate to say that she wanted to protect him. "Who can tell me what is going on?" Chung Aran was the last to arrive with a confused face. She looked at the scene in front of her, and then she also looked at the girl who was posing. When she was about to say something, she saw a swinging tail behind the girl. Things, this tail is real? "Mr. Chun, what are you doing?" In the corridor, to be exact, in the corridor outside the presidential suite of the Song Dynasty Hotel in Fog City, Peter Chan, who was in charge of receiving him this time, was sneakily sticking his ear to the door as if he was eavesdropping. "Don't be noisy. I'm listening. I'm listening." Peter Chan suddenly closed his mouth because he recognized the voice that asked him the question. "Master Chiu, good evening. The moonlight tonight is so beautiful. Ah, the moonlight tonight is indeed very beautiful." Luochio nodded and casually looked out of the window. Then, "Mr. Chen, what did you hear?" This," Peter Chan quickly said. "Listen to the movement of the rats." "Master Chiu, you don't know. Today is our hotel's anti-rat day. You don't know. These rats are very smart. I don't know what to eat to grow up." "I see." Luochio smiled and nodded. "Do you want to go in?" "No, I'll just listen." "Yes, I've listened." "Master Chiu, don't worry. There's absolutely no problem with your room. It's very hygienic and safe." At the same time, Peter Chan didn't hurry to move aside and made a gesture of inviting him in warmly. However, he was quite confused. He didn't see Master Chiu go out all day, so why did he suddenly come back from outside? And his female companion also came back, and it seemed like she just came back for shopping. But in the afternoon, didn't the cleaner say that she saw the two of them sunbathing on the balcony of the suite? "Thank you." Luochio smiled and nodded. He directly swiped the door card and walked into the room with Miss Maid. "If you have any orders, just let me know." "Master Chiu, I'm here 24 hours a day." "Thank you, but I think, Mr. Chun, it's better for you to rest." "No trouble, no trouble." Peter Chan hurriedly smiled apologetically. But in his mind, he was thinking about what happened when he reported the information to Miss Ing last night. Last night? What? A sexy women's sailor suit in a smaller size? Did he really want this? Song Ying, who was applying a facial mask, suddenly opened her mouth and the mask fell off. She muttered in disbelief, "I didn't know. That woman looks so dignified, but she actually knows how to seduce men. Tut." Missing? What are you talking about?" "Oh, no. You did well, Chun." "Peter Chan, right?" "Well, you did very well. Keep up the good work." Ing put on a new mask and then said casually, "I want to know what they said, what they ate, what they did, and how long they did it. The more detail, the better, okay?" Okay. How long did they do it?" "Just do it. Don't talk so much nonsense." Yes. The door of the room closed slowly, and Peter Chan's thoughts were pulled back from the video call last night. Then he happily approached the door and put his ear to it. Unexpectedly, the door suddenly opened. Peter Chan felt his ear was burned by something fiercely, and he immediately screamed like a pig being slaughtered. Miss Maid was standing outside the door, holding a kettle used to boil water. She then covered her mouth in surprise. "Mr. Chun, why are you still here? Did I hurt you?" "The water is cold. I was going to throw it away." "It hurts." "It doesn't hurt. It's okay, haha, it's okay." Peter Chan forced himself to smile. But in his heart, he was crazily complaining. "This is the hotel's presidential suite, miss. Are you kidding me by coming out to pour water? And the water is boiling. How can you say it's cold?" Genius remembered this address in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1298. Retorting back was impossible. Chun-Bai quickly left with his tail between his legs. He had no choice but to leave. His ears really hurt from the scalding, and he urgently needed something like a burn ointment. When Miss Maid returned to the room, Boss Luo was opening the light screen he used to observe the food. Several different light screens were arranged in an arc in front of him. Facts are really wonderful. Luochio suddenly sighed. Yi glanced at the images on these light screens, knowing that her master was talking about what happened in the social work center. These two little guys probably don't want to bother you anymore. Miss Maid smiled. After all, for them, their master is still too mysterious, and they will be afraid and worried. Well, who is this? Hearing Miss Maid's slightly puzzled voice, Luochio glanced at the leftmost light screen, which was the scene of a helicopter. You know him? Luochio asked curiously. I just expanded according to the relevant concept. Who is this? Mordred, Yi thought, and said, one of the 12 Knights of the Night mechanism, and also one of the survivors of the war 100 years ago. In the early days after the war, he was crowned as a hero. Basically, his name was praised in the non-human world of Euroland, and he was called the most powerful knight in history. His strength even surpassed the first Mordred. You fought with him? Luochio looked up and asked curiously. Miss Maid shook her head. No. At that time, the former owner created a place with the concept of a castle as the base camp of the Black Soul Envoys. The war happened in this castle, and the previous owner was in the hidden layer of the castle. It's a pity that in the end, they didn't manage to break into the hidden layer. Instead, they slaughtered a batch of inferior Black Soul Envoys that the previous owner temporarily transformed. Then why did they think they had won? Luochio was more curious. Miss Maid smiled and said, because before the hidden floor, the last gatekeeper is number 31 in Kintaro. At that time, more than half of the subjugation crusade troops were killed before they managed to send number 31 back to the Ark of the Covenant. Although they suffered some injuries, they still had a good time. However, the overall combat strength of the subjugation crusade had been reduced to less than 20%. The previous shop owner saw that there was no point in doing so he ordered Kintaro to retreat. After that, the punitive forces destroyed the castle. After looting some things, they declared victory. Well, it seemed that the previous generation's bad taste was even worse than his. Spoils? They're just some useless trinkets that were cleared out from the storehouse to make space. Of course, in order to make the effect more realistic, the previous generation also put in a few valuable items. It seemed that the last few treasures had been divided among the leading forces of the punitive expedition. Therefore, there's actually no loss. Master, please rest assured. Luochio changed the topic without changing his expression. What about Knight Mordred? Miss Maid looked at the helicopter flying in the night sky on the light screen again. She recalled and said, probably past the passing line of a transcendent. At that time, he could have fought with Kintaro for a few rounds. Right? I remember his real name is Farrell. Strictly speaking, he has no talent but is very hardworking. Well, what happened later? Why was he locked in the castle? It was still the light screen at the edge, but the time on the light screen had begun to rewind. Everything began to rewind. Finally, it went back to one night before, the moment when Farrell broke through the door with the soul, which in front of the castle on the island. Because 3 years after the war, Farrell suddenly slaughtered more than half of the members of the Knight organization, including 2 of the 12 Knights who were heavily injured and had no choice but to retire. Just like that, he went from being a hero praised by many to being the most vicious and evil knight in history. In fact, after the war, Farrell's power had further improved. He probably left the initial stage of transcendent. In this way, Miss Maid felt that her master might have no idea, so she directly took out a unit of measurement. If external factors are not considered, Farrell 3 years after the war should be able to fight with the heroic spirit summoned by Miss Lucifer. Excluding humans with special bloodlines, this Knight Farrell is probably the only one among the ordinary people who can be compared with the fire cloud evil god of Hua Nation. Why did he slaughter his companions? Miss Maid said, how should I say, post-war PTSD, if described by modern science, is probably the most appropriate. He didn't feel that the war had been won. Instead, He felt that he had lost the war. He even suspected that all his companions had been corrupted by the Black Soul envoys. His companions had even become the Black Soul envoys. The victory was fabricated. Of course, he was right about this. However, the people around him thought that Farrell was delusional and thought that he was sick. Later, Farrell's illness worsened, which led to the slaughter in one night. When dawn came, he had a brief moment of clarity. After realizing what he had done, he voluntarily put himself in prison to atone for his crimes. He should have been sentenced to death, but later, people used his achievements in the war to offset his crimes. In the end, he was sentenced to about 800 years of imprisonment. In fact, the Knight organization was reluctant to give up on Farrell because they believed that time would be the best medicine to heal wounds. A long period of imprisonment might allow Farrell to recover. They needed a powerful force like Farrell to subvert common sense. I'm suddenly very interested in meeting him. Luocio smiled slightly. I wonder what kind of person he is. Oh, by the way, can you compile a list of the survivors of the war 100 years ago for me? Since they have extraordinary power, they should be able to survive, right? Yes, there's still some. Miss Maid nodded. I'll sort it out after Master takes a rest. Miss Maid, who was still an alchemy puppet, naturally didn't need to sleep. Luocio waved his hand and temporarily turned off the information light screen on the far left. His eyes swept to the one in the middle. Social Work Center. Yes, it's me, Klein. Sorry to trouble you. Mr. Nick, to send the things to this address. No need. I think I can handle it. After that, Knight Klein put away the phone and looked at the scene in front of him in distress. Among them, Will, his two colleagues, and Chung Iran were standing together. On the other side, there was Miss Ork, who attacked him and her brother. At this time, Miss Ork was constantly receiving frightened and curious looks from several people in the Social Work Center. In fact, she had long been used to such looks, so she was quite calm at this time. However, Ogo was a little nervous at this time, and he looked at Will from time to time. This was an activity room in the Social Work Center. At this time, it was abnormally quiet. Klein knew that he needed to break this silence first. So after 2 coughs, he slowly looked at Will and said, I know, some things are difficult to explain. But please believe me, I am not a bad person. And I and people like me exist because of these things. Do you understand what I'm saying? I know. Like the Avengers, right? At this time, Will's companion said cool twice, and then looked at Miss Ork with shining eyes. It's really Miss Ork, not a cosplayer, but a real person. Oh, God, can I take a picture? Can I touch your tail? Miss Ork was baring her teeth. Don't be so rude. Will could only pull his companion, and then began to explain to Miss Ork using both his hands and mouth. In the end, he gave up on using body language, took out his phone, and began to use the translation software. Should I say that I'm insensitive, or that I have a strong ability to accept? Klein smiled bitterly in his heart. In the past, he had heard many seniors who had become official knights and could go out on missions alone mention that occasionally he would meet ordinary people who not only did not have any resistance to non-humans, but even excitedly asked about it. This time he met one. The young knight was still thinking hard about how to deal with this matter. Fortunately, because of the sudden appearance of Will and the others, there was no real fight between him and Miss Ork in the end. After that, he explained his origins. Thus, under the doubtful attitude of the Beast Woman, the scene of everyone being in the same activity room happened. In fact, the main reason was that Ogo whispered in her ear some of the things that happened yesterday, saying that this Klein should be a good person. At this moment, unlike them, although Chung Iran was also surprised by the existence of orcs, after the surprise, he did not panic too much. He was still carrying a guitar that could not be explained by common sense. But he only stood silently at the side, not intending to attract the attention of others. Miss Ork suddenly stood up and faced Klein. At the same time, she whispered something into the phone that Boss Luo gave her. Not long after, the mechanical female voice of the translator sounded. Can I really believe you? Klein could only use the same method to communicate with the other party. Miss, please believe me. I really mean no harm. In fact, yesterday my companion rescued a group of orcs who were kidnapped by orc traffickers at the pier. But in the chaos, a few orcs got lost. I believe that you should be one of them. Now, I'm asking my companion to bring one of the orcs. I think, when he arrives, everything I said can be proven. Miss Orc suddenly nodded and said a few more words into the phone. Okay, I'll believe you for now. Klein was a little gratified and quickly said, Thank you for trusting me. Also, can I ask why you trust me? Are you moved by my sincerity? Knights must be sincere. This was the valuable experience that Mr. Gareth taught them. I can hear people's heartbeats. Miss Orc said indifferently. People who lie will have slight changes in their heartbeats. I can hear it. That's it. Klein was disappointed for a while. So was not my sincere gaze. Sure enough, my practice is still not enough. This time, there was no translation. Miss Orc just nodded. Klein showed an awkward smile and then came in front of Will and the others. Mr. Will, I'm sorry for scaring you tonight. If possible, please accept my apology. Will and the others looked at each other. How could they say it? In general, this guy on a motorcycle was quite old-fashioned. No, it's nothing. Will shook his head. Actually, I think that if those guys last night were like you, there wouldn't be so many things after that. I'm really sorry. Looking at the motorcycle rider, bowing 90 degrees to apologize, Will and the others couldn't hold it anymore. Will could only wave his hand and say, Oh, right. How about we get something to eat? I think everyone should be hungry, right? With that, Will quickly winked at his companions and Chunga ran, meaning to let them leave now. Obviously, Will didn't really want to prepare food. He intended to use this excuse to let them leave first. Oh, yes, I'm hungry too. Let's go and get something to eat. Let's go, Chung, come and help. His companions were about to open the door. Unfortunately, Clay stood in front of the door and said apologetically, I'm sorry, everyone. For the time being, I can't let you out of my sight. According to the rules of the Knight organization, any ordinary person involved in inhuman matters must be under our surveillance. Of course, we won't invade your private property and safety. So, please cooperate with me. Fight! They couldn't win, so they had to come back embarrassedly. After that, the activity room became quiet all of a sudden. Chung Aran suddenly walked to Will's side and asked in a low voice, Will, this child, is he the talented child you told me about last night? Will nodded. This might be a topic that could ease the atmosphere. Yes, you must be amazed. This child is really a genius. Suddenly, Oga left his sister's side. Under the surprised gaze of Miss Beastman, he walked to Will's side and gently pulled up the corner of his shirt. Will looked at him with a face full of surprise. Oga seemed to be saying something. Seeing Will's puzzled gaze, he finally took out his harmonica and played a song quickly. You want to finish learning this song from last night? Will seemed to understand. Oga seemed to understand too, so he nodded lightly. His face was slightly red, bashful and shy, but his eyes were full of anticipation. Will swallowed his saliva, at the same time telling himself loudly in his heart that this was a boy. Boy. Baidu search 81 Chinese website. No advertising message.